Hi everyone. Today we're going to be doing one thing only, which is reading the PDF file version of Raising Awareness Regarding Bad Empanada and His Fascist Behaviors and Marxist-Leninism versus Anarcho-Communism. So we'll be talking all about this individual and things that he said, including some of these examples that you can read for yourself. Here's a little bit of information about myself located at the bottom of the post. You can pause the screen and read it yourself. If you want to support my work, you can do it through Ko-fi or Patreon. You can also like, share, and subscribe. Last but not least, you can leave a comment. With all of that being said, let's get started. One more thing, this specific article is effectively a script, and the vast majority of it is read from top to bottom. It is version 1.0 of this document, meaning that it will contain some mistakes. I will correct some of those after the fact, but barring those written mistakes that version 1.0 contains, I will also make various small mistakes while reading, and I don't really have the time or energy to go through this particular video to make it all smooth and shiny. So it's basically a trade-off. It'll be mostly scripted, mostly without mistakes, but it'll be a little rough around the edges. All the same, this is largely me reading from a script, so just keep that in mind as we proceed. Also, this video is going to be quite long, just because there's a lot to cover, especially because other people could have replied far sooner, except basically none of them did, requiring me to really go all out and make a video that details this as much as humanly possible, me having written about this extensively in the past, me citing as much material as I can, providing evidence that I've found, that I've experienced when engaging with Bad Empanada directly, but also evidence given by other people. So there's a lot, everything's signposted, and if you want access to the links that this document contains, just download the document and read them. They're all cited, or go to my blog and read them there. If you want to download the PDF file that I'll be reading, you can access it here, specifically the fully censored link, contained within the paragraph, post-only note on censorship, PDF versions, and document reading level. Regarding censorship, the website version is fully uncensored. The blog version here is censored with an extended disclaimer explaining why. Also, for ease of access, I've uploaded several PDF versions, one that is semi-censored and another that is fully censored, depending on reader needs. While PDFs have bookmarks for quick and easy reading, they are otherwise completely identical to this post, except for the fully censored version, which doesn't include most of the censored nudity found here, and is the version I will be reading on YouTube for the visually impaired. However, while most of the versions are censored to some degree, excluding the 18 and up version of course, the subject matter is still intense. Keeping that in mind, I'm advertising this post's reading level and the YouTube video at 16 and up, regardless of the level of censorship employed. Or younger, with a supervising adult. See the Miller test and how it applies here. Here's the PDF document. All we're going to be doing is reading it from top to bottom. This will take me a while to get through. There's a lot of different sections. Keep in mind, though, that if the document ever seems too long, you can access the individual sections through Adobe Reader, located on this sidebar here. This PDF for raising awareness regarding Bad Empanada and his fascist behaviors and Marxist-Leninism versus Anarcho-Communism has been fully censored, i.e. more than it is on my Safe for Work blog. Images of censored nudity have been omitted to make reading it on YouTube possible. Click here to read Raising Awareness in its original censored form on my blog. Click here to read it in its fully uncensored form on my 18 and up website. Raising Awareness Regarding Bad Empanada and His Fascist Behaviors and Marxist-Leninism versus Anarcho-Communism, version 1.0, ages 16 and up or younger with a supervising adult, for censored nudity and sexual topics of an educational nature, by Persephone Vanderwoord. Note, except for the above image, all images herein are hyperlinks to their file locations. Click on them to access and download the full-size originals. This post appeals to any who wish to help raise awareness about Bad Empanada and his abusive behaviors online. i.e. his reactionary fascist behavior kettling trans sex workers and other minorities like a sad little freak, despite him claiming to be an activist who cares about helping minorities by preventing genocide. Raising awareness began as an email to individual content creators on YouTube, but I figured I may as well share this dossier on my old blog and 18 and up website, a more secure means of archiving information than Google Docs. I've also updated and expanded on this post repeatedly from its email form, adding substantial portions from my own Gothic gay anarcho-communist corpus, and my friends and I critiquing the Marxist-Leninist approach, specifically its sexist, queerphobic, and otherwise exclusionary reactionary elements that bad Empanada currently contributes to, i.e. by punching down at me, but also my friends, e.g. my partner Bay Ryan below. Despite these expansions, this post retains some of its original epistolary elements. Note, the website version is uncensored, the blog version is censored with an extended disclaimer explaining why. Disclaimers. Artist left, Bay Ryan, right, Persephone Vanderward. Oops. Disclaimer. Regarding essay contents, all opinions are my own, i.e. as part of my research conducted alongside my non-profit sex ed book series, Gothic Communism. The material within is written, speaks about public figures and popular media for purposes of education, satire, transformation, and critique, hence falls under fair use regarding copyright and free speech regarding defamation, obscenity laws, the Miller test. It pointedly covers Bad Empanada's YouTube channels, but also the medical industry and police state, etc., and is pointedly part of the larger work I do beyond my book series, e.g. my Healing Hellions Q&A, where I interview sex workers of all different kinds, and my anti-fascism research concerning popular media more broadly. Click here for the entire disclaimer this work belongs to, a portion of said disclaimer being included in this post, re. regarding the Miller test. Lastly, many of the links on this page lead to my age-gated 18 and up website, where my entire work on Gothic Communism is stored and exhibited, though you can find a safer work version of the same promo page and series abstract on this blog. Content warning: racism, genocide, fascism, Zionism, classism, aporophobia, sexism, ableism, hatred towards neurodivergence, e.g. plural people, rape, rape apologia, toxic masculinity, incels, xenophobia towards Indigenous Peoples, transphobia, and whorephobia. Regarding the educational nature of this page's censored nudity, this page contains censored images of nudity, sexual activity, with some visible pubic hair below, i.e. tied to me and my friends' sex work, education, and activism elsewhere. It is not pornographic in function, therefore not legally obscene, but serves to educate, satirize, transform, and critique fascism under the Miller test using censored nudity. To that, while this page's reading levels specifically targets adults for reasons of academic complexity, I ultimately feel the censored images it contains remain suitable for teenage audiences, meaning under 18, already learning about sex elsewhere. You'll find similar scenes of uncensored nudity in sex ed books meant for children, 10 and up, e.g. It's Perfectly Normal by Robbie Harris and Michael Emberley. Last but not least, any publicly available images are exhibited for purposes of education, transformation, and critique thus fall under fair use and free speech. Private nude material and collabs with models are specifically shared with permission from the original owners. All models involved are over 18 and were over 18 when said material was made. Is there some legal gray area involved? I would imagine there is. However, trans people, women, and other marginalities are already relegated to such purgatories, i.e. the de facto brothels of the state, e.g. the kitchens, bathrooms, and washrooms, but also prisons and gutters, sexuality removed from public life, and shoved into the bedroom exclusively per nuclear models, re. Foucault. They're already oppressing us, e.g. removing our health care on a state level through federal threats of force, see Eli Newman's Out of Reach, Where Do Michigan's Trans Youth Go for Care Now? And looking for future excuses to further objection, therefore genocide, against labor's monstrous feminine side. Cartesian thoughts, thinking beings versus extended beings, re. Patel and Moore. So I'd rather speak up while I can, meaning messily using what my friends and I got, versus playing by the state's pimp-like rules to such a narrow, myopic, color-within-the-line degree to get pogromed anyways, meaning accident of birth, born into a Gamban state of exception, mid-crisis. The closet is death, the street and taking to it often our only mode of recourse, the proverbial dead walking the earth, doing so while the imperial boomerang sails home. RE, police states, foreign atrocities, and the imperial boomerang. RE, Christava and Creed, objection meaning to throw off in Gothic theory. Generally this happens into a state of abnormality, the outgroup, all to reinforce normal, the in-group, as the status quo, acting dogmatically superior to arbitrarily alien things. E.g., said status quo pimping nature is monstrous feminine / alien, meaning the Gorgon and things comparable to of it, i.e. nature is alien, criminal, or otherwise other, tied to workers, often sex workers, the Medusa and its proxies common recipients of the abjection process being furthered, i.e. the state enforcing its own status quo for profit under capital, thus raping nature as placeholder for labor, whether human or not, and the environment scapegoated for state abuse. See Always a Victim for a deeper exploration of this concept, as well as my entire research on Amazon/Gorgons, aka Amazonimachia, or Monster Battle. Doing so happens to pro-state dogma, being historically fueled by racism, queerphobia, sexism, and other bigotries, any and all conducive to such ethnocentric operations, extermination, ranging from the Enlightenment, aka modernity, into late-stage capitalism. From antiquity to that point, the oldest profession to abuse is the whore, with some degree of racism, particularly the barbarian outsider to abject by insider elements tied to house and home, is roughly as old, versus systemic racism tied to capital, which is far newer. If you're curious, here's the changelog. 11/12/2025. Added mention of Fanon and Coulthard's respective White Mask books, 1952 and 2014. Added explanations of capital's exploitation of sexual labor excluded from revolutionary efforts, including communism on paper examples like Lenin's USSR and Mao's China, by quoting from Patel and Moore's A History of the World in 7 Chief Things, and tying it to my own activism and that of my friends, my sex work giving voice to sex workers often excluded from current Marxist research, e.g. from John the Duncan's Woke is Dead, which I call him out for in my own response video, added excerpts from Patel and Moore, but also my own Hailing Hellions Q&A series to the footnotes area. 11/11/2025, expanded on the Mao addendum, further iterating how dictators suck, according to Marx's vampire critique of capital, i.e. as I have used it before. 11/10/2025, added another disclaimer regarding the educational nature of this page's censored nudity, added several exhibits to About Me and my friend's sex work activism in particular, added a small section on tokenism, and an addendum on Mao and how bad Empanada likes to imitate him. (11/9/2025) updated the content warning to account for bad Empanada's gish gallop of different bigotries, tied to his obscurantism, masquerading as communist in bad faith. Added further information about my partners and how minorities are still workers despite their modular oppression, marginalities. 11/8/2025, expanded on concerning Marxist-Leninism, further critiquing the YouTuber Socialism for All and similar creators, added about my PhD cited from elsewhere, and made various changes throughout, added further information about the Miller test and to how it applies to here, updated my disclaimers regarding this post's censored nudity. 11/7/2025, added a section I'm a rape survivor and concerning Marxist-Leninism, various changes throughout. 11/6/2025, added a section Notes on Stalin, Lenin, and why Marxist-Leninism historically sucks for women and queer people. 11/2/2025, added a table of contents and assorted evidence submitted by others section, also added an email to evidence, one concerning Bad Empanada condemning Aaron Bushnell's February 2024 suicide, in which Bad Empanada never replied to. Table of contents. Note, much of this dossier has been expanded on, i.e. from its original October 20th email, above, the addendums in bold, font, and color-coded. Regarding nudity, censored or not, as educational, not criminal, On tokenism, sidebar. Bad Empanada is a bad actor, re a TERF and a SWERF. The Miller test and how it applies here. Concerning Marxist-Leninism versus Gothic gay anarcho-communism, featuring socialism for all and chemical mind. Original email opening about me and my friend's sex work activism in particular. I'm a rape survivor. About my PhD. Raising awareness about Bad Empanada's abusive behaviors. My total evidence. Notes on Lenin, Stalin, and why Marxist-Leninism historically sucks for women and queer people, with Bad Empanada being functionally Marxist-Leninist. Regarding Mao, assorted evidence submitted by others, my larger body of work. If you wish to contact me, see my contact info at the bottom of the page. The rest of the post spells everything out and shows proof of Bad Empanada's bigotries, as well as some censored nudity from the sex work that my friends and I do deeper in. A puritanical Aussie who uses Nazi rhetoric while punching down at minorities, e.g. disabled people, plural folk, furries, trans people, etc. Regarding nudity, censored or not, as educational, not criminal, the paradox of whores is that female feminine workers are always whores, or those treated as feminine, with TERFs portraying their own brethren, cis or trans within toxic white feminism, what I call fascist feminism, re girl bosses, male gatekeepers, and the gender-critical movement, but whose triangulation extends simultaneously into racialized spheres, e.g. whose POC men, males, called boy or buck to subjugate them towards imperial models, re Fanon's black-skinned white masks, but also the cunning recognition of minority struggles as something to appease through tokenized representation schemes, re Coulthard's red-skinned white masks, see John the Duncan's The Cunning Recognition of Palestine for an expansion of this idea. Any way you slice it and or combine it, slavery is slavery, but operates through modular elements, class, culture, and race, privilege, oppression, that historically intersect, requiring intersectional solutions while mapping them out, on and off stage, what I call half-real, borrowing from Jules' ludologies, while applying them to anarcho-communism. The status quo oppressors many forms, with tokenism further complicating things. See sidebar on tokenism. No matter how virginal or modest we appear, the elite rape by design, i.e. for workers being arbitrarily of nature, thus monstrous feminine, being in ways the state, not just capital, historically treats as food per Kristeva's abjection process. See nature is food. Also, above image, Prince Shakur's I mapped Trump's real base. Here's what I found. The state does so through dialogues of revenge geared towards extermination, me vis-a-vis wolf, see toxic schlock syndrome, always an alien, war, criminal, terrorist, etc., to pimp across cycles of generational abuse, pitting in-group workers against out-group workers. Profit equals rape, the whore's revenge challenging profit, the pimp's revenge, by reversing abjection, hugging the alien on the aegis, re rape reprise. We are alien, which becomes something to embrace over time, i.e. reversing objection to decolonize hell, hugging the alien to have the whore's revenge against profit. Source, replying to John Barbas. Under capitalist realism, hell is a place that always appears on earth. I also write. The same goes for socialist realism, socialism of the Marxist-Leninist sort, never meant to be the final staging point, but one that through its own historical failures remains frozen in time. While modesty is fine as an option, I would not recommend dressing like a nun exclusively to challenge nuclear models, including red nuns, e.g. Lady Izdahar, still fetishizing power much like nuns frankly do. Below. Source, Instagram. I believe Izdahar is Muslim, but my point still stands. Modesty unto itself is not a virtue, at least not one that serves workers universally, insofar as those treated as vice personified are historically demonized by the more modest among labor as a whole. Furthermore, sex as fetish can be a weapon and armor, or Gorgon Amazon as I researched them, and while it can communicate upon veils, e.g. Sedgwick's imagery of the surface, can also communicate in the buff, so to speak. Such nudity shouldn't be discounted as a holistic form of rebellion. Gothic gay anarcho-communism is holistic and fights for universal liberation, nude or not. Universal means freeing whores, scarlet but also green women below, to speak for themselves in all forms, not just modest ones. It's a critique I levy not only at ML coquettes pining for the USSR, but also Berliners nostalgic for Weimar's doomed interwar period, e.g. Jill Suzanne Smith, who I critique for her own myopic and exclusionary Berlin coquette, specifically for valuing whores that don't look like whores over visibly monstrous, whore-like ones, re. joy under fascism. Modesty is historically compelled, a form of selective segregation where women, often religious women, Christian or not, straight or not, hedge their bets by leaning into such things. A witch hunt is a witch hunt, a whore, one the state fetishizes while pimping workers, i.e. foreign and domestic, during reactive abuse selectively and collectively blaming labor for, pinning the elite's crimes onto, in which we reverse Asprey's terrorist counter-terrorist process mid-abjection, and cryptonomy as wholly dualistic affairs below, Radcliffe style, the black veil housing an imaginary menace, both make-believe and tied to real people the elite constantly triangulate violence towards, regarding Exhibit 98A4 from What is a Witch, Part 2, artist J. Scott Campbell. Witches and goblins are classic symbols of persecution, Alphaba, the monstrous feminine, witchcraft, merged with blood libel and sodomy tropes. The Maguire version, Wicked onwards, is trans, see sexist ire. The Wicked Witch of the West can be a symbol of proletarian revolt. It can just as easily be reduced to a neoconservative sexbot who gets mired down in incremental equality through convenience disputes, e.g. about public and scholastic nudism, instead of actually critiquing power. Just as power and resistance share the same space, the aesthetics of death and power as badass can be employed by bourgeois and proletarian forces in cryptonymic opposition. The context must be gleaned through dialectical material scrutiny as a matter of oppression disguise, one in good faith and bad as witch, trademark, mid-Amazonamachia, tokens look like the oppressed, green skin or not. Alas, segregation is ultimately a form of silence, and silence is genocide, death, i.e. horse police horse, through the same Gothic terror language that ML's historically abject, which workers more broadly can reclaim, e.g. policing the whore and our sweet revenge. Furthermore, for Gothic models and poetry as practiced through sex, drugs, and rock and roll, cryptonomy and its own duality per dialectical material dialogues, workers/the state, allow for workers of all stripes and functions to show and hide during mere play, re. Gloggins, what Plato called shadows, Swift, splendid Mendex, and Milton darkness visible, i.e. in ways that treat nudity as armor, educational versus something merely to fear and reject as unironically alien, satanic, what have you. We camp canon because we must, and through camp, specifically what I call Little Gothic BDSM, we reclaim our power in all its forms, re. interrogating power through your own camp. Flow of power determines function, not aesthetic. Use whatever aesthetic you like as long as it, and its campy performative ironies, actively empower workers, meaning in intersectional solidarity and consciousness, therefore tactical unity, achieving a pedagogy of the oppressed, healing from rape but also preventing it, thus power abuse in the future. No exceptions, the state another almost to walk away from, towards post-scarcity using pre-capitalist ideas, including wars. Instead, hell is our disco, or danger disco as I put it, re. the quest for power. Don't hate us, heed us, as human yet alien when we reclaim dehumanizing language of the whore as alien, to reclaim the base and recultivate the superstructure on the aegis, re. on twin trees. Cryptonomy being to show and hide at the same time. Refer to Volume 1's Introducing Revolutionary Cryptonomy and Volume 3's Chapter 5 Rebellious Subterfuge for a good introduction, exploration of cryptonomy tied to heavy metal and the stuff the heavy metal sings about, from damsels to demons. Also refer to Understanding Vampires and The World is a Vampire to see these ideas explored by me through Marx's ideas. On tokenism, sidebar. Whores police whores as much as not. Slaves historically punching down at fellow slaves to cannibalize when tempted by state pay. Betrayal is betrayal, assimilation poor stewardship. So while I've worked with plenty of rebellious whores, such as Kuwu above, and our focus here is Marxism and Marxist-Leninism, which tend to be white, straight, and male per state models, tokenism is a separate topic worth thinking about as we do, i.e. through intersecting betrayals tied to the same status quo bad empanada a white straight man serves, e.g. Green's Manbox or Plato's allegory of the cave, re. The World is a Vampire, being something he, a weird canonical nerd, and acts as much as token trans people like Natalie Wynn or Abigail Thorn do, or POC Indigenous people do with black or red skin white masks. As I write in investigative journalism on tokenism from Is Metal Racist, while my specialty is tokenism, regarding tokenism and fighting it, and I historically began my investigative work emphasizing TERFs and SWERFs. I've combated a variety of modular bigotries that often intersect, e.g. racism, exploring it not just among white moderate men like Solomon Nelson, refusing to investigate race science in bodybuilding. White moderates still don't challenge fascism, and Karl Jobs in video games, Hot Carl, but also people defending them who aren't white, who are bigoted in a variety of ways, e.g. interracial bigotry from a token pimp, featuring Gen X Gamer and Potion Sword Run, and token Asian GNC lawyer defends alt-right billionaire, featuring LUS. I've also examined racism, race betrayal, tokenism tied to race, in my book series multiple times, e.g. Afrocentrism and token queer black Nazis in 2023's Castlevania Nocturne, Back to Necropolis, token Amazons, Toxic Sloth Syndrome, and Indigenous betrayals, white Indians, historically employed. And Indigenous betrayals, white Indians. The Roots of Betrayal, Part 1, Assembly Trauma and Questions of Betrayal and Beloved, Frankenstein, The Last of the Mohicans, and The Terror Infamy, featuring Toni Morrison and Howard Zinn. For minorities, activism and existence go hand in hand. Food for thought, and something to keep in mind as we investigate Bad Empanada as a bad actor more broadly. What he does, other workers more oppressed can do too, i.e. regardless of privilege-oppression ratios and media types involved, castrating ourselves. Bad Empanada is a bad actor attacking minorities, a TERF and a SWERF. Academia is not cut and dry. Speaking as someone who values Bad Empanada's post-colonial work, I've certainly given him plenty of time and leeway to prove he isn't transphobic. Given time, though, he's only leaned into his TERF and SWERF tendencies, while acting innocent, more anti-Zionist than he actually is, an imposter in Gothic language, and one who punches down against minority anti-Zionists like my friends and I. As we proceed, then, please keep in mind that Bad Empanada is a bad actor attacking minorities, but especially GNC people, sex workers, and neurodivergent folk. Yes, Bad Empanada might call himself this or that to hide from this fact, at least on his main YouTube channel, serving as a front for his alt-right turn, and he'll certainly call me and my friends plenty of things while telling you not to read our work, e.g. sucks pest, creep, useless eater, etc., with Marxist-Leninism happy to advocate for dictators while historically punching down at women, sex workers, and queer folk. Useless eaters being a classic attempt at alienation and demonization, i.e. not a worker from a classist, ableist, straight white man versus recognizing the shared struggle of fellow workers with more oppression than him. My partners are still workers despite their oppression, 2 images down. Bay is disabled, for example, but also an ecologist who does sex work alongside other forms of physical academic labor. And Victoria is a former sex worker, Healing Hellions, an interview with Victoria Sakes, who works in other ways, has a full-time job, pays a mortgage, and a home, even though if they didn't, sex work is still work, and homeless unemployed people are workers with basic universal human rights, i.e. as all marginalities are. As workers to defend from the state and cops to stochastic terrorism by calling us terrorists per the terrorist counter-terrorist binary. By reducing us to non-workers, cops, traitors, class or otherwise, scapegoat us to meet their function, a classic fascist tactic towards women and queer people, i.e. 1. Historically employed by the Americans, Russians, Soviets, Chinese, hooliganism, and Germans before, during, and after World War II. In Mali culture, people are not defined by their labor in pre-colonial models. This includes disabled people. Dr. Huhana Hickey explains, I want us to try and find a way to teach Mali the pre-colonial beliefs around disability, because the post-colonial beliefs have led us where some Fanu, family, or a group of people connected through such ties believe we hold a Makutu, curse, or a Hala, fault, which is that we are a deficit, that we are a curse, we're a sin. We're none of those things. Prior to colonization, we were a Tonga, treasured possessions, both tangible and intangible, that hold deep cultural and spiritual significance. To define someone purely by their labor value, specifically their ability to contribute to society and the national body, the leader, dictator, and heads of state, is again fascist and ultimately regressive, in ways of capital the Soviets historically upheld, and in the Russian Federation continues to, emulating imperialism, thus the West, more and more. In my case, Bad Empanada calls me rapist in so many words above. Despite my being a rape victim, going mask off, showing Jadis's face, as well as being someone who consciously and collectively advocates for sex worker minority rights and sex education to prevent rape in my community and around the world, those Bad Empanada calls useless eaters through the same colonial bad faith logic one wrongly accusing me of rape. Meaning, for my definition, to disempower someone or somewhere, a person, culture, or place, in order to harm them, generally through fetishizing and alienizing acts or circumstances, socio-material conditions, that target the mind, body, and or spirit. Rape can be of the mind, spirit, body, and or culture, the land or things tied to it during genocide, etc. It can be individual and or on a mass scale. Source: Psychosexual Martyrdom. Artists left to right: Bay Ryan, Victoria Sakes, and Crow. For example, my partner Bay Ryan is Mali, disabled, furry, and trans. My partner Victoria Sakes is intersex and into BDSM and crossdress. And my partner Crow is non-binary and into pet play, but mostly puppy play. All survivors of abuse who participate in a shared goal to prevent rape, and the very sorts of people that Bad Empanada called useless eaters when I rose to their defense. In truth, he's kind of an incel, fascist, and Zionist, punching down mid-Darvo at trans, anti-Zionist, and anti-fascist sex workers like myself and other minorities below. To relegate, partition, intimidate, and ultimately rape, and where they ban books, they will ultimately ban people. Deny, accuser, reverse, victim, offender. An abuser's tactic that alongside obscurantism, the theft of symbols and language, e.g. the crooked cross, fascists love to abuse while infiltrating communist circles. Bad Empanada is fascist while calling himself leftist. Fascists are incels and incels are reactionary, with Elliot Rodger and similar goons calling for the complete and utter control of women, gender, and sex, which Bad Empanada is also doing in bad faith. Silence is genocide. Censorship precedes and accompanies genocidal action. Prohibition disguised as a protection of public decency and morals prior to empire invading itself. It happened in Germany in the 1930s, but also America, a nation that's experienced myriad moral panics designed to preserve capital and the bourgeoisie at the cost of all workers. It only starts with minorities and marginalized workers, the elite having the in-group cannibalize the usual victims, before throwing the executioners into the same ignominious furnace. Silence is genocide being my slogan, one modifying the Brooklyn Museum's Silence Equals Death exhibit, itself borrowing the Nazis' pink triangle, a death warrant given to Holocaust-era gay people below, to make a larger point about American genocide of queer folk, especially homosexual men, during the AIDS crisis. See Understanding Vampires for a broader history of queer abuse on either side of the Atlantic. That's what fascists do, e.g. not just the famous book burnings of the German Institute of Sexology in 1933, but it's perfectly normal as one of the most feverishly banned books of the 90s. Supporters rally around as perfectly normal, with current anti-trans legislation seeking to literally ban trans people online for being pornographic. Michigan's puritanical House Bill 4938 is part of Project 2025. Their doing so is occurring alongside a deluge of gay panic defense and hate crimes, salivating over the possibility of accelerating trans genocide everywhere, i.e. Bad Empanada's a TERF and a SWERF, and if you scratch a SWERF, a fascist ergo rape apologist bleeds, someone who sees the Miller test as an obstacle to genocide. Therefore, the killing of trans people as allies to the Palestinians that Bad Empanada claims to care about. The Miller test and how it applies here. This post is a continuation of my sex positivity book series and follows the same rules, i.e. the Miller test, i.e. as a work of sex education meant to protect myself and others from waning worker rights and stricter obscenity laws, Project 2025 onwards. To protect myself and my work, I've chosen to cite more of the series disclaimer here, i.e. from my 18 and up website's disclaimer page. Regarding this book's artistic, pornographic nudity, and sexual content, Sex Positivity thoroughly discusses sexuality in popular media, including fetishes, kinks, BDSM, gothic material, and general sex work. The illustrations it contains have been carefully curated and designed to demonstrate my arguments. It also considers pornography to be art, examining the ways that sex-positive art makes iconoclastic statements against the state. As such, Sex Positivity contains visual examples of sex-positive, sex-coercive artistic nudity borrowed from publicly available sources to make its educational critical arguments. Said nudity has been left entirely uncensored for those purposes. While explicitly criminal acts, taboos, and obscenities are discussed herein, no explicit illustrations thereof are shown, nor anything criminal, i.e. no snuff porn, child porn, or revenge porn. It does examine things generally thought of as porn that are unironically violent. Examples of censored erotic artwork and sex work are present, albeit inside exhibits that critique the obscene potential from a legal standpoint of their sexual contents. Ultimate sexual acts, normal or perverted, actual or simulated, masturbation, excretory functions, lewd exhibition of the genitals, or sadomasochistic sexual abuse. The point of this book isn't to be obscene for its own sake, but to educate the broader public, including teenagers, about sex-positive artwork and labor historically treated as obscene by the state. For the material herein to be legally considered obscene, it would have to be simultaneously qualifying in three distinct ways, aka the Miller test: appeal to prurient interests, i.e. an erotic, lascivious, abnormal, unhealthy, degrading, shameful, or morbid interest in nudity, sex, or excretion; attempt to depict or describe sexual contact in a patently offensive way, i.e. ultimate sexual acts, normal or perverted, actual or simulated, masturbation, excretory functions, lewd, exhibition of the genitals, or sadomasochistic sexual abuse; like serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. Taken as a whole, this book discusses debatably prurient material in an academic manner, depicting and describing sexual conduct in a non-offensive way for the express purpose of education vis-a-vis literary, artistic, political enrichment. While this book was written for adults, its uncensored images provided to them through my age-gated website, I don't think it should be denied from curious teenagers to a supervising adult, and think the censored versions on my blog are suitable for teenager audiences already learning about sex elsewhere. The primary reason I say this, apart from the trauma writing sections which are suitably intense and grave, is that the academic material can only be simplified so far, and teenagers probably won't understand it entirely, which is fine. Plenty of books are like that. Take years to understand more completely. For the sexually developing readers younger than 16, ages 10 to 15, I honestly think there are far more accessible books that tackle the same basic subject matter more quickly at their reading level, e.g. It's Perfectly Normal from 1994, meant for ages 10 and up. All in all, this book examines erotic art and sex positivity as an alternative to the sex education currently taught or deliberately not taught in curricular-extracurricular spheres. It does so in the hopes of improving upon canonical tutelage through artistic dialectical material analysis. The Miller test being under attack. Per FSC versus Paxton, the Miller test is currently under attack. Source: June 27, SCOTUS ruling, with the Trump administration enforcing misappropriation of the law to abuse sex workers in bad faith, i.e., all under the guise to protect women and children, simultaneously violating people's privacy and health care rights. To it, porn and sex education/art are not mutually exclusive, and anyone who clutches their pearls about sex education as badly as Bad Empanada does has more in common with the Puritan shills and fascist pimps of history than those they oppress, i.e. more in common with Adolf Hitler, Margaret Thatcher, or Stalin, ergo Marxist-Leninism, and the state apparatus pimping workers, than with Alexandra Kollontai, who Stalin betrayed, or myself, currently a target of Project 2025, trying to make trans people illegal by attacking porn. R.A. Michigan's Puritanical House Bill 4938, aka the Anti-Corruption of Public Morals Act, Widespread censorship always begins with porn bans, porn in this case being the same sorts of people outlawed and ultimately destroyed by capital. We queers, the frogs of fascist overtures, more sensitive to fascism for being what fascism, the nuclear model, aka Rome, hates. By treating us as inherently pornographic, such rhetoric on their part is maximalist, and if enacted, will only succeed in furthering genocide against all workers. By targeting my friends and I to puritanically censor and shame, Bad Empanada is placating fascism by taking part in fascism, i.e. he supports genocide, as does anyone willfully endorsing or otherwise enabling his genocidal arguments. Making obvious broken clock exceptions for his admittedly fine post-colonial essays, e.g. on Manifest Destiny, Jewish exceptionalism through Zionism, Christopher Columbus, and Operation Car Wash, all of which he currently uses to whitewash the transphobic and horrorphobic content on his second channel and on his social media accounts. Concerning Marxist-Leninism versus Gothic gay anarcho-communism, featuring socialism for all and chemical mind. While Gothic communism is a holistic discipline with a dualistic dialectical material approach, full of power determines function, not aesthetic, the rest of this document explores the sexist and queerphobic elements of Marxist-Leninism, not the racism which I explore elsewhere, i.e. tied to the historical past, e.g. Marx, Lenin, and Stalin, but also Bad Empanada and those who support him, occupying the same spheres. Ari notes on Lenin, Stalin, and why Marxist-Leninism historically sucks for women and queer people. One reason it sucks is we're generally considered not communist by MLs, e.g. socialism for all, recently saying, I wasn't even a communist at that point, I was more of an ANCOM, 21st century capitalist crisis, only to espouse organizing as being what workers need, followed by saying to his audience, go read Marx's stuff from 1850, more or less. I explore racism elsewhere in fascist critiques of popular media, e.g. heavy metal, bodybuilding, and video games that apply anisotropically to Marxist-Leninism, i.e. MLK's white moderate problem, not restricted to the United States, and one that includes sexism and queerphobia endemic to revolutionary movements, making exceptions historically. Lenin's dictatorship of the proletariat, just a dictatorship period, and one whose Soviet omnibus ultimately decayed faster than Western capital, not to discredit socialism here, merely point out how making deals with fascists and selling out your women and queer folk will historically bite you in the ass later on. Nerd and pussy slayer aren't mutually exclusive, but sometimes I wonder with MLs. Also, you can have kids and still be bad in bed, a bad partner. The jury's still out on Marx in that respect. The fact remains, anyone who excludes women and queer folk from the larger revolutionary process, as MLs historically do, as a servant pimp of the ruling class ipso facto. As a Gothic gay anarcho-communist, I think Marx certainly has his moments, but the ability to organize isn't unique to MLs, no matter how much they say otherwise. Furthermore, he and his homeboys have suffered a bit of a dryness problem, being dull as dust and exclusionary towards women, queer folk, and unpaid labor for centuries. John the Duncan points this out regarding unpaid labor in their videos, excluding the waged section. Persephone Vanderwaards, a Gothic researcher, author, sex worker, activist, responds to Woke is Dead, featuring John the Duncan, only to omit sex workers from the conversation. As Patel and Moore astutely point out, sex work is historically unpaid, undervalued, and overexploited under capital and systems of different nominalities. I extend this to, or rather focus on, sex work as something to fight for while doing it, re my Hailing Hellions Q&A series, interviewing sex workers of different marginalities. Regarding the dryness problem of Marxist-Leninism, I combat it as follows. To combat nation-states as the ultimate foe, Gothic communism's chief aim is to be campier, thus sexier and funnier than Marx, i.e. camping his goals to develop a holistically intuitive anarcho-communism that got through a widespread, collective, and solidarized emotional and Gothic intelligence awareness that recultivates the superstructure and reclaims the base through intersectional resistance and de facto extracurricular re-education, the wisdom of the ancients, or cultural understanding of the imaginary past, endemic to this organizational process, and not one any particular group can monopolize through violence, terror, and monsters, etc. Simply put, Gothic has that mood. that cool factor to do the trick, i.e. by subverting monstrous language, which normally dehumanizes workers in nature through popular stories furthering abjection, us versus them, to suitably humanize the harvest, which capital and its realism can only pimp out when eventually raping nature as monstrous feminine whore, re me vis-a-vis creed, see nature is food. The whore's revenge against profit, then, re profit equals rape per state models, not just capital, see rape reprise, is to fuck back on the same aegis, i.e. when the man comes around, show him your aegis. When done correctly, its paradoxical, cryptonymic exposure will set you free, re silence is genocide. But reversing abjection must happen together as one, per intersectional solidarity healing from rape through a shared pedagogy of the oppressed, walking away from homeless and towards post-scarcity while becoming better stewards of nature than historically have existed. Assimilation is poor stewardship. Medusa demonstrates there is power in what they try to control. Take it back by using it in ways they can't steal from you. Become the Gorgon. Source abstract from Gothic Communism promo page, written 2023, updated 2025. In response, me and my friends' work wasn't the magical stuff of unicorns. It took organization to achieve, communication, but also years of planning between over 70 sex workers, artists, and academics, re acknowledgements, 2024, as well as funding and security through my website to install and advertise, my security specialist being Josie Howarth, re my site security reviewing and recommending Josie Howarth, and Love Pseudo. In short, ANCOM workers can organize too, and whores are workers, the oldest form of workers in fact, i.e. the specter haunting Europe not being of Marx, as Derrida argued in 1993, but of Mary Shelley, as I argued in 2025, having published Frankenstein in 1818, the year Marx was born, re making monsters. The state is historically white, male, and straight, re understanding vampires. The terrible idea that women and or sex workers more broadly need a straight white man to think for us, being one of Marxist-Leninism's biggest myths and things it tries to revise regarding Soviet censorship and genocide afterwards. Nothing is more censored than sex, the silence of speech surrounding sex, and its abuse through state models enforcing silence, a form of genocide. A dictator is a pimp, and one Marx and Engels didn't fully push for like Lenin, a bit of a bloodthirsty cunt, pushing for dictatorship later in their name, but for which our legitimacy was previously decided by them when it should have been by us. re from making Marx gay. Even so, Engels, despite calling sodomy abominable in origin of the family, private property, and the state, and lacking the ability to distinguish harmful forms from non-harmful forms, tries in the same essay to imagine a world beyond his own, that speaks to our goals. What can we now conjecture about the way in which sexual relations will be ordered after the impending overthrow of capitalist production is mainly of a negative character, limited for the most part to what will disappear. But what will there be new? That will be answered when a new generation is grown up, a generation of men who have never in their lives had to know what it is to buy a woman's surrender with money or any other social instrument of power. A generation of women who have never known what it is to give themselves to a man from any other considerations than real love, or to refuse to give themselves to their lover from fear of the economic consequences. When these people are in the world, they will care precious little what anybody today thinks they ought to do. They will make their own practice and their corresponding public opinion of their practice of each individual, and that will be the end of it. In response, Sherry Wolf writes in The Myth of Marxist Homophobia, while Engels is explicit about how heterosexual relations would undoubtedly be transformed by a socialist revolution, his broader point is that by removing the material obstacles to sexual freedom, the ideological barriers can fall. This raises far-reaching possibilities for a genuine sexual revolution on all fronts. Again, I am inclined to agree, but want to critique Engels a bit more than Wolf does. The people he's discussing are those born into a world where capitalism simply doesn't exist when the person is born. To posit that is to kick the can down the road and shrug one's shoulders. Instead, the current generation must try to imagine a better future while developing communism in the bargain. To that, hearts, minds, and bodies can change while people are alive. And the trick, I would argue, is through Gothic poetics. I was in the closet once, and have needed to work hard, while alive, to become a better, more authentic person. It's certainly far too late to rescue Marx and Engels, the historical figures, from the embarrassing grave they admittedly dug for themselves. But we can transform their specters as living entities inside society and ourselves. Take what is useful and leave the rest. Marx will understand. And if he doesn't, to hell with him. We whores and or fags know how to organize, e.g. logos and negotiating labor exchanges above, model and artist Blood Bunny and Persephone Vanderward. And don't need state-sponsored pimps for that, re. The basics of oppositional synthesis. 2025, see my entire manifesto, aka Manifesto and Instruction, 2024. And while tactical unity is a thing, and I'll take certain MLs over, say, open fascists or American liberals, progressives, and SOCDEMs, e.g. non-compete, and Luna Oi are pretty great, the fact remains we still have our disagreements, e.g. all dictators are bad, and anarchy, the horizontal distribution of power, is infinitely preferable for queer people and women than the usual betraying of these groups by men like Lenin and Stalin after Marx died. To it, Marxism and Marxist-Leninism are historically sexist and queerphobic. They're also technologically outdated, having existed before the internet, which isn't exclusively corporate, e.g. Epos Vox, The Net is Healing, Beginner's Guide to Mastodon and Fediverse, 2022. The epicenter of transformation is, as always, centered among workers, not just paid male and or straight Marxist-Leninists aiming state cannons or rhetoric at the usual whores they pimp. While they're in prayer, the best time. Luckily for us, porn is praxis, class war, ass war married to culture and race, mid-cryptonomy, reversing abjection, sexual gorillas hugging the alien. We'll get to some of that here, and for broader dialogues on how capitalism sexualizes everything, refer to my PhD, or thesis statement 2023. For now, remember this essay articulates Ben Empanada's Marxist-Leninist tendencies, therefore his Stalinist, fascistically queerphobic apologia among MLs alienated from sex, or why I prefer anarcho-communism. Despite having dated a ML myself, Kuwu was an ML above. See, I'm a rape survivor section. Ultimately formulating anarcho-gay anarcho-communism in response to Marxist-Leninism's historically queerphobic, sexist, and environmentally destructive tendencies. The Soviets might not have been as bad as the West, as some MLs like to point out, e.g. Chemical Minds, a history of queer rights under socialist states, but that's easy for them to say when they're ostensibly not gay, women, or whores. Source, YouTube community post Chemical Mind cited Persephone Vanderward's React number 28, Ben Empanada calls for political violence against critic calling him fascist. Women and queer folk can betray the cause too, regarding tokenism and fighting it. Concerning Chemical Mind and myself, it's not like either of us is unbiased here, with me having written and drawn a non-profit 6-book series on anarcho-communism, Gothic communism, and Chemical Mind having his own relatively small 128-page book on the Soviet Union, People from Another World, a reappraisal of the USSR. But he's the one handing it to a fascist weirdo like Ben Empanada, as I say in my React video above. Apologizing for state harm of any kind is rape apologia because the state, a form of capital, rapes by design. It did so under Stalin, Mao, and the American presidents of the time. It did and does before and after World War II. As we'll see with Marx and Lenin, but also Ben Empanada, calling dictators necessary isn't just a fatal flaw in Marxist-Leninism. It's deeply regressive, even fascist, and so far as women and queer people go, some MLs are kind of incel-y at times, straight or not, male or not. The same goes for Marx and Engels. They weren't just queer-phobic, but sexist too, when trying to control sexuality through broader discourse, e.g. working men of all countries unite, 1844. All they would get better about the sexism, Engels speaking to a generation of women who have never known what it is to give themselves to a man for many other consideration than real love, in origin of the family, private property, and the state. Their homophobia never went away, making Marx gay. Furthermore, the rights of women were eventually negatively impacted by the Soviet Union too, rescinding its own feminist liberatory policies after World War II, Red Pen's Women at War Communism, so much so that my own mother, a scholar of Eastern European studies with a focus on the USSR below, walked away from her studies with a profoundly negative opinion of the Soviets and their treatment of women, but also queer people, read her daughter. She was not a fan of Stalin, nor did she like the CIA before anyone else. Asks, from it began with a whisper. Source image, a Polaroid taken of my mother when she was younger, shortly after the fall of the Soviet Union, i.e. circa 1991, while hanging with the Red Army. Mom's incredibly educated, but one whose streetwise past assures that she always has a trick or two up her sleeve. She also gave me a room of one's own, in essence funding my entire book series. Unable to account for the sins of their own dictators, accountability is alien to many MLs, a fact that shall come readily apparent when examining Bad Empanada and his ilk. Original email opening. To whom it may concern, my name's Persephone Vanderward, and I'm reaching out to ask you for your help. In short, I have a smaller YouTube channel tied to my research, offsite, on my 18 and up website and older Safer Work blog. I'm specifically trying to bring wider public attention regarding someone who is calling for political violence against my friends and I, Bad Empanada. Bad Empanada, despite enjoying some degree of reasonable doubt for being on the left, is calling for political violence against trans people, but also indigenous, neurodivergent, furry, and plural people, with me being trans and my friends being GNC plus those other qualities. Here's where Bad Empanada's abuse is actually happening on Blue Sky. Note, in more recent coverage of him, I noticed Bad Empanada's rhetoric sounds very similar to the 10/14/2025 political expose on relatively young American GOP leaders. See React number 28. Bad Empanada calls for political violence against critic, calling him fascist, included in postscript evidence package. Please note, I'm a sex worker, so my Blue Sky account is 18 and up. However, I also have Safe for Work coverage, which I'll share as well, and again, some censored nudity, e.g. above, just to drive home the point that my friends and I do sex work tied to our activism. About me and my friends' sex work activism in particular. My work ties to that of my friends' work. About me, quoted from my published materials, I have my website's About the Author page. I have my MA in Gothic English Literature, an independent PhD in Gothic Poetics and Little Gothic BDSM, focusing partially on Metroidvania, and I am the author of the multi-volume, non-profit book series Sex Positivity. Its art director, sole invigilator, illustrator, and primary editor, the other co-writer, co-editor being Bay Ryan. I'm a male to female trans woman, Tolkien and Amazon enthusiast, anti-fascist, atheist and Satanist, polypan kinkster, erotic artist, pornographer, and anarcho-communist. In short, I'm a trans ANCOM activist, academic, and sex worker, but also author of multiple books, 8, on Gothic Communism as I coined it, for my book series. See postscript for more info. My book series is made in collaboration with over 70 sex workers, so when someone fascist like Bad Empanada tells my audience, seriously do not click, these people are deeply unwell and can't help themselves but to permanently sexually harass everyone around them. Remember a few basic things. What I say about him is true regardless if I have clothes on or not, how much money I make, sex I have, more than him, grass I touch, work I do, or gender I identify as, i.e. that he's a TERF and a SWERF employing Darvo, to project his weird reactionary tendencies onto me. TERFs are SWERFs, and if you scratch a SWERF, a fascist bleeds, like, I'm a sex worker dude, and if the image isn't nude, it's censored. Classically, they use a fig leaf, not a Metroid, but my point still stands. That's not harassment, you puritanical weirdo, so quit with the Darvo already. I.e., I didn't tag him, he came to my page and accused me of harassing him. Real incel behavior, specifically reactive abuse. He'll still be fascist because that's what his actions indicate, e.g. punching down ipso facto against an anti-Zionist like me makes him a Zionist, ergo fascist, crying about a fig leaf the same way some Philistines cry about marble sculptures. That I'm currently under attack politically by my own government, not just Bad Empanada, a hypocrite who relies on his fans to do his fighting for him, a trans woman faced with imminent harassment following the election of Trump and implementation of Project 2025, e.g. the FSC versus Paxton June 27 SCOTUS ruling regarding media censorship, not just of porn in Texas, but anything obscene, and the elimination of the Miller test, as well as Michigan's puritanical House Bill 4938, aka the Anti-Corruption of Public Morals Act, and the treatment of trans people as inherently pornographic, obscene, in ways that bypass the Miller test. Source, my site security. In regards to treating trans people as inherently pornographic and obscene, which Bad Empanada is doing with my friends and I, Ari acting the pimp by blaming the whore or those he treats like whores. Ari, Any publicly available images are exhibited for purposes of education, transformation, and critique, as fall under fair use. Private nude material and collabs with models are specifically shared with permission from their original owners. This includes my ex Kuwu, a sex worker, communist, and trans person like I am, but who also gave me permission to use the material we made together to make money with, and which I opted instead to use in a non-profit book. That trans people are people and sex work is work, even if Bad Empanada and his weird hateful friends don't think so, think we're inherently pornographic and degenerate, thus worthy of political violence, whose puritanical nature delegitimizes sex work as activism to keep workers sexually ignorant under state control. Workers aren't stupid, but human and capable of deserving of standing up for ourselves, i.e. by fighting fire with fire, versus pimp-like workers who, Soviet, Chinese, Russian, or American, historically betrayed labor in puritanical ways, treating us as alien, like Frankenstein's monster, as something to keep in chains, thus perpetual unironic rape and torture. Exploitation and liberation share the same stages and bleed off those stages into daily life. That work and play, aka business and pleasure, are not mutually exclusive, i.e. porn, art, through sex work remain valid forms of protest, revolutionary action, regardless of what ye and other more prudish MLs arbitrate, austerity politics from hypocrites, puritanically punching down for the state and capital. Per Little Gothic BDSM, these forms include BDSM, rape play, and fetish work tied to Gothic poetics, monsters including Creed's Gorgon, RA the monstrous feminine, but also Amazons as I research them, e.g. Maui Doms and horror junkies like Mercedes the Muse, who also reads academic material while combining it with sex education, sex work, above. Regarding prudish MLs arbitrating sex and its policing, who try and monopolize violence, terror, and monsters, R.E. Weber, Asprey, and me, for-profit per Cartesian heteronormative nuclear and settler colonial models, furthering objection to canonical Gothic's invention of terrorism, R.E. Crawford. Such models and monopolies are not all-powerful, workers able to reclaim the power of such things on the aegis. See all these concepts outlined in The State, Its Key Tools, from paratextual Gothic documents. Exhibit 1, Artist Mercedes the Muse, top and bottom. Top, Exhibit 67 from Toxic Schlock Syndrome. Model top left, Mercedes the Muse. Artist right, Persephone Vanderwaard. Mercedes specifically asked to be drawn getting fucked by Toxie, those relegated to the gutter, reclaiming our humanity through dehumanizing language historically abused by state powers. They also include sex tapes made by couples for the cause, whose work is an extension of their humanity, and in Marxist language, their labor value reclaimed through negotiating labor exchanges planned between workers in their instruments of extraction and exchange across space and time. Exhibit 2, Artist left, top to bottom. Tyler and Husband, NK of Sunshine, cited It Began with a Whisper. Right, Mugiwara, cited Toxic Schlock Syndrome. Mugi is a parent, plural, and housing challenged. Tyler is trans and disabled. NK of Sunshine is autistic and a rope bunny. All models were commissioned to specifically appear in my book series, i.e. for such educational purposes, satire, transformation, and critique, tied to BDSM, Gothic themes, Ancom theory, ludology, and gender studies. Ultimately, Marxist-Leninism is historically materially toxic towards sex workers, women, queer people, and the environment. More on this in a bit. To that, Bad Empanada isn't just calling for political violence against me and my friends, the sort enacted not just by Americans, but by Hitler and Stalin against queer people and various other minorities too. The Nazis historically shuttered the brothels of the Weimar Republic, their own American-inspired prohibition cracking down maximally on anything degenerate they saw as an affront to public morals, i.e. in light of state economic failure scapegoating labor, including sex workers, i.e. me vis-a-vis Jill Suzanne Smith's Berlin Coquette, and joy under fascism. Bad Empanada is fascist, specifically an accelerationist leading into these blame the horror historical trends, i.e. a TERF and a SWERF, pushing Trump to enact violence on poor trans people and other minorities treated like trans people, e.g. Michigan's aforementioned Anti-Corruption of Public Morals Act designed to make trans people illegal in Michigan, setting a dangerous precedent for the whole nation and its allies victims alike. I guess the Nazis really do flee to Argentina. He's also impeaching my character as I call him out for it, and that is what I'll be raising awareness towards and giving my evidence here, e.g. belittling me for being poor above, but also accusing me of sexual harassment and assault, i.e. despite my being a rape victim, and someone who actively advocates for sex worker minority rights and sex education to prevent rape in my community around the world. That's literally the point of my book series, and to break capitalist realism, but I digress. To that, Empanada maliciously describes the work that my friends and I do as conspiratorial. Also, real quick. But also done by one mad woman in the attic, re a series of blog posts that no one reads, with alienation and isolation being a common bully's tactic, divide and conquer as old as empire and city-states. In truth, my work is actually our work, Gothic Communism, a larger project conducted by me and others, illustrating mutual consent based on informed labor exchanges, representing a wide variety of people that Empanada considers useless eaters, worthy sacrifices, despite being workers he'd sentenced to forced labor for the state. We desperately need to bring back forced labor, says Empanada on October 8, 2025, responding to my essay. This essay, Slurs Aren't Activism, was written to critique Natalie Wynn, aka ContraPoints, for her liberal Zionism, while also ableist critics like Empanada calling her narcissist, affecting myself and my friends, i.e. being trans and or mentally ill, including having various mental disorders. Source Skeet, Empanada, October 8th. We need allies, not pimps. Silence is genocide, and Empanada is calling for our silence like a pimp, which the Puritans and Protestant ethic historically serve as, i.e. not just mine, but anyone I protect from people like him, e.g. hurling around rape accusations against a survivor of rape like myself. To him, we're not human. Our lived abuse something for him to attack and scapegoat, belittling us as degenerate, decadent, alien, criminal, diseased, what have you. It takes a special brand of asshole to punch down at rape victims of genocide, but that's what Empanada is doing, furthering the abduction process, i.e. creating Kristeva, which I want to reverse make cryptonomy when in Rome. Pertaining to diseased, e.g. The Sick Men of Asia and Solve from Bruce Lee's Chinese Connection, Fist of Fury, 1972. I'm a rape survivor. Abusers, TERFs or otherwise, MLs or otherwise, often take pleasure in not just hurling new abuse at someone, but getting them to talk about past abuse so the attacker can deny it, i.e. blaming the victim, the whore, the thinking queer women, but also trans, intersex, or non-binary people, for the system's abuses. But this ain't my first rodeo. I, Persephone Vanderward, am a survivor of rape. While so are many of my friends, re an interview with Victoria Sakes, here I'll be focusing on me. So let's talk about my rape and rapist, e.g. before I get to Empanada and my evidence against him accusing me of rape. I was raped by my ex in Florida from mid-2020 to January 2022. This brings us once more to Jadis, real name Lindsay Wheeler, a person not without means, at least according to my admittedly limited intelligence at this point, thus someone I unmask here, Scooby-Doo style, with some degree of risk, especially since Donald Trump is now president. Whatever hells they visit upon me, should they try to, this step towards my own hell is one that decolonizes their awful notions of such things, i.e. they were the first TERF SWERF I encountered in person, and the primary motivating factor for writing Sex Positivity as a series, which started with the intent to discuss TERFs as not only why they suck, but how they as witch cops look like witches policing their own kind. Next page. Jadis was a traitor who raped me. Source going mask off, showing Jadis' face, 2025. Artist Jadis. Source Persephone Vanderwards. Why I Submit, a Subigothicist Attitudes of Metroidvania, Mommy-Doms, and Sexual Persecution, 2021. I would go on to detail these proceedings at length in multiple pieces of writing, ibid. To that, these exhibits are screen caps from previous recorded videos produced between us with their full knowledge and consent, i.e. the videos were recorded with their full permission, explicitly for me to keep for my personal enjoyment. Jadis enjoyed them knowing I had them, effectively making them homemade porn between two willing and eager participants. The screen caps used are before sexual activity takes place, with Jadis either having all of their clothes on, or the nude portions of the body off camera, i.e. my showing of these recorded conversations is to prove they occurred, not to demonstrate their total pornographic contents, which I refrained from showing in these exhibits. exceptions being towards myself as nude, solo, to demonstrate the erotic qualities of courtship that took place between us, what Jadis and I exchanged prior to us moving in together. Jadis abused me repeatedly in ways I have explained in the past, re escaping Jadis, July 6, 2024, and shall explain again here. The context for these screen caps is to give vital background to what I am explaining, and to show my abuser more than I have previously done in earlier accounts. In short, I'm putting a face to the alias. I write as a victim, outing that portion of my abuser as I see fit. My past accounts of abuse regarding them have been up since at least early 2023, e.g., You Really Do Have a Beautiful Body, Soros Sex Positivity versus Sex Coercion or Gothic Communism Manifesto, modified from July 2022 to 11/4/2023, but expanding in 2024 to include censored images of Jadis' body, but not their face, and more detailed accounts of their abuse. Source Transforming Our Zombie Selves, June 27, 2024. Furthermore, the older samples cite even older media that has been online since before 2022 and includes uncensored images of Jadis' face and real name, e.g. Why I Submit, February 19, 2021. Recordings of Jadis identifying themselves and their profession for the mic, e.g. Dreadful Discourse, Episode 1, What is the Gothic, June 26, 2020. Me with my arm around them after they graduated from UF. Source tweet, Nick's Movie Insight, May 6, 2021. The point being, Jadis has known about my identifying writings of them since before we broke up, many of which they offered feedback on, being cited in my writings about them after we broke up, calling them my abuser, and then later still my rapist. The rape claim has been active for over 6 months, and my claims of abuse for roughly 2 years. Not once has Jadis ever contacted me after February 14, 2022, either to harass me or ask me to cease and desist. To which I reasoned back then and now, they know about the claims and ability for their name to be connected to the alias, but haven't done anything about it, i.e., that it wouldn't be especially difficult for anyone reading these publicly available accusations to follow the references back to their original publicly available sources, thus to acquire Jadis' full name, where they went to school, what they look like, and ultimately what they did to me. This also includes publicly available Google Docs that detail their abuse, not just cursorily, but in vivid and extensive detail, re setting the record straight again and counting my ex's abuse of me to another victim, August 30th, 2020, and setting the record straight my ex's abuse of me, February 17th, 2020. Said documents have been up, live and unaltered since their posting dates. Jadis has not once reached out to me to acknowledge them, but apart from blocking their Twitter main, I have made no effort to hide my work from them either. I've even written about their abuse of me and other people and featured images of all of us together, e.g. Tim with Jadis and I, escaping Jadis. And Jadis still hasn't done anything. I can only reason they either know they're guilty and or don't care, and to my knowledge are still living with the other abused person, i.e. their former ex Tim, who knows everything about Jadis because I told them, and were with them longer than I was, over 10 years versus roughly 2. Despite this, I have since been accused of rape before when talking about my own abuse, i.e. when talking about unrelated things, only to have it brought up by future abusers, i.e. from replying to John Barris, a follow-up to my Is Metal Racist video. Moderates, for example, rank rape to uphold capital through rape apologia, e.g. Richard Dawkins saying he cares about women, when, in truth, he only cares about policing the bodies and language of victims, women or not, i.e. Melissa McEwen's 2013 article about him was eventually taken down. For many survivors of sexual abuse, lasting trauma is defined not by the actual acts, not by their quality or quantity, but by the support they receive following the abuse. Dawkins notes that, as soon as he got away from his abuser, I ran to tell my friends, many of whom had had the same experience with him. He may not recognize that as a crucial point in his not suffering lasting harm, but the fact that he immediately found support among peers who validated his experience, who never shamed him nor called him a liar, and the fact that, years later, they would still speak to one another about the abuser after the abuser died, is an invaluable resource to a survivor, which many of us do not have. To the contrary, many survivors of sexual abuse are silenced and neglected and shamed by the very people who are meant to support and protect us. Source way back, Dawkins defends himself with more rape apologia, 2013. The difference between someone like Dawkins and victims like us of any kind of rape, power, or abuse, reading the room is just that, victimhood in service to workers and solidarity. while Dawkins was abused himself, McGowan reminds us how he uses his lived abuse to encourage further abuse systemically, to bury his feelings and punch down. In other words, he's a cunt. To clarify, and be crystal clear, ranking abuse, but especially ranking rape of any sort, is generally done to deny its existence, e.g. I was raped, then accused of not actually being raped, i.e. by someone who was defending a crypto-fascist from criticism, a form of tone policing that bullies the victim while blaming and gaslighting them. Gen X Gamer, in a token fascist, or a token bigot, goes full mask off fascist, May 11th, 2025, goes full mask off, i.e. this time saying he'll prove that I'm a fraud, only to employ witch hunt and conversion therapy arguments while dead-naming me and misgendering my friends and I. He also apologizes for sexual sex worker abuse, slut and king shames myself and others, hates on artists, poor people, service workers, denies the validity of my arguments and relationships, calls me a coward for talking about my own rape, attacks my professions, are a sex worker and erotic artist fundraising for sex workers and disabled people, with him literally comparing me to Andrew Tate while confessing to his own wife being a sex pest. All while still being racist, sexist, and transphobic as he brown-noses Carl Jobs. Dude straight up is asking Carl, a broke crypto-fascist who misled his own audience to fleece them, now a matter of public record, Ari, the judge from Billy Mitchell's lawsuit certifying Carl's defamatory actions, to sue me for calling Carl and Gen X racist. Source, Token Defenders of Carl from Hot Carl, 2025. Beyond cis and racial minorities, and MLs, which I suppose are a political marginality, at least in the US, I've also been accused by other trans people and or sex workers of rape, not respecting consent. Ari Ibid. Much of my transphobic hate coming from the gaming community. FPS metal fans defending their favorite franchise from me. Ari, no girls or trans people allowed, 2020. Most of this came from straight white guys, mind you, but some of the hatred also comes from GNC folk punching down at me as some kind of toy-breaking asshole, e.g. my ex-friend Jade, a Doom fan who met me through my 2020 Doom Eternal review, the one that got all the trans hate above. Someone who, loving metal, horror movies, video games, and action figures, tried to get me to transvestigate my own partner, only to incite violence against both of us when I refused, i.e. from other sex workers, many of whom were cis, but some who were not, re setting the record straight, Transmedia Experience, 5/26/2023, and Policing the Whore, 2024. The reality of being a survivor is we are often not believed by allies and even by other survivors of rape who rank rape according to varying degrees of privilege and oppression, e.g. men rank rape with cis women, but cis women rank rape with trans women, these realities intersecting with race and class as well. Black, for instance, is a survivor of abuse, and someone also trans who is all too familiar with the realities of surviving rape. Quote, I am a survivor of sexual violence. I've openly spoken about that many times, and something that I'm truly coming to embrace is that we don't really live in a society that gives victims of sexual violence justice. Even if you have proof, even if you have evidence, the likelihood of you seeing your rapist put away is very, very slim. And even when you do, it's almost always for a very, very short amount of time. Source, Cat Black's DoorDash Girl, and why I'm glad I never reported. In my case, I survived my rapist only to fall into the arms of another abuser, Kuwu. Except Kuwu helped me heal from rape, as did my other partner, exes, including me learning from my abusers having harmed me mentally, physically, and sexually, using whatever was on hand, e.g. heavy metal and sexuality, through punk culture experienced by horny nerds, re, from replying to John Barbas. Nerds and whores aren't mutually exclusive, i.e. nerds fuck, often to metal, but also Emerald Web. And if you want to learn more about music, data baddie, the YouTube algorithm will only get you so far. E.g. Kuwu and I, but really any of my exes teaching me through metal and sex. Lindsay taught me about industrial and Tool. Zool about, well, Zool, drone, vaporwave, post-punk, and a gazillion other weird genres on Rate Your Music, where I used to write reviews. And Kuwu showed me bands and artists like Slush Puppy, Neutral Milk Hotel, Billie Eilish, FKA Twigs, etc. Exhibit image material from returning to Volume 1 2 years later, give or take, after 5 books are Kuwu's hand in forming Ludo-Gothic BDSM, 2025. Top right, bottom left, and bottom right, Kuwu and Persephone Vanderward. Top left. Exhibit 6B 2A1, My exes and I, Zool and Jadis. I've written about both extensively in this book series, but each has their own respective expose, non-magical detectives and showing Jadis's face. As explained in those pieces, Zool's face continues to be mildly censored because they're more neurotic, vindictive, and marginalized than Jadis. Both harmed me greatly, but through said harm inspired me, i.e. to write and illustrate sex positivity to heal from said harm, thus ultimately meet Kuwu and those who came after Kuwu. For every useful idiot, you have accidental allies. I also learned similar lessons from the people I dated afterwards. My partner Bay Ryan is Marley, non-binary and disabled. Crow is non-binary and into monster fucking and horror movies. And Victoria is intersex and a rape survivor, like I am, all above. None of us are perfect victims, nor were those who harmed us perfect abusers. Instead, we're all part of the same pedagogy of the oppressed, approaching abuse from different vantage points. From Paulo Freire's 1970 book of the same name. R.E. Healing from Rape, 2024. This includes the music each of them showed me, but also Gothic media more broadly, e.g. Crow loves werewolves, Victoria loves Angel Dust from Has-Been Hotel, and May loves drag queens and kings, e.g. Eartha Kitt. i.e. the more you play in consciously intersectional and rebellious ways makes you more active in your ability to rebel, learning from sluts, even the closeted ones, meaning while capital relegates us to the bedroom for straight, white men and tokens to enjoy. In Kuwu's case, they showed me kindness after Lindsay and taught me how to heal from rape. R.E. Healing from rape, while embracing my burgeoning queer self, my second puberty, Ibid. Kuwu would help me formulate Ludo-Gothic BDSM and give me a groundwork for developing Gothic communism, the idea and the book series, after our friendship ended. R.E. Returning to Volume 1. There is seldom a happy ending with rape survivors, but there is a silver lining once we begin to heal. R.E. Kuwu, a trans Marxist-Leninist, helping my communist ass further radicalize towards anarcho-communism of a gay and Gothic sort. All that being said, Empanada has repeatedly accused me of abusing others while simultaneously downplaying my education. Someone, I should add, who is far more educated than himself, according to his own logic and hypocrisy, no less, below, e.g. with my master's, let alone my PhD, and subsequent book series both attached to, next section. Yet Empanada, a career YouTuber who makes a fair deal of slop on his second channel and whose formal education isn't online, so probably not higher than undergrad in that case, hasn't been shy when declaring my work worthless, i.e. calling it mere blogs that no one reads or cares about, and which only serve to save other people from the danger I, apparently according to him, pose to the public. R.E. Sorsky, Bad Empanada, October 28, 2025. In true Radcliffean fashion, the self-righteous in public is a monster in private, Bad Empanada diligently crafting a Trump-style armor around himself anywhere he goes, insisting his own invincibility while projecting his abusive antics onto his victims. R.E. Darvo, an obscurantism from a weird puritanical nerd. R.E. Sorsky, Vanderward Art, October 15, 2025. Bullying rape victims, whores, and GNC people is apparently the only time Bad Empanada feels smart, happy, and fulfilled, hence why he can't help himself. He, like any other abuser, which fascists are by design, can't get enough. Downplaying my education, revolutionary character, and impeaching my general character too, e.g. being trans, poor, and a sex worker, i.e. while he receives unmitigated support, tolerance, and latitude from a variety of openly Marxist-Leninist content creators defending and endorsing him anyways, R.E. Chemical Mind, but also Second Thought and Hakim and Yukopnik. Next section. Betrayal takes many forms, women and sex workers, queer or not, some of the first victims when incel types like Bad Empanada and their defenders get involved. R.E. Dictator apologia being rape apologia, states' rights trumping worker rights in a particular order that favors white straight men first and foremost. For Bad Empanada and his ilk, we whores are already a sideshow, the raped whore even more of a juicy opportunity to point one's finger at, witch hunter style, and declare inferior to a supreme gentleman such as himself, as if dude. Rape isn't a statement of truth to acknowledge, but cop victim status to assign by the witchfinder in question. They're wicked. Get them. Such traitors are bad actors who generally wear concentric veneers, i.e. monopolizing the criticism of particular abusers despite us, the survivors of said abuse, being more than capable, e.g. me having critiqued Natalie Wynn for longer than Bad Empanada, writing trans, TERFs, NERFs, and queer bosses back in 2022 far more aggressively than Bad Empanada did, R.E. Short Critique of ContraPoint's Ambi video, 2022. With the gift of reflection, you can look backwards too, watching them before they went to the dark side. Woulda, coulda, shoulda. To call such men cowardly would perhaps be too obvious. To make it obvious to those who otherwise might not care, we can hang the would-be executioner with his own rope, to hoist him on his own petard, as it were. Lucky for me, Bad Empanada's colossal arrogance has furnished me with an entire arsenal of stupid, cruel moments, which I, a PhD, can turn against him on the aegis. About my PhD, nerds, PhDs or otherwise, aren't always virgins, and often play with sex and sex toys, those treated like sex toys below, i.e. doing so as much as whatever work we're doing at any point in time, in which abusers like Bad Empanada dismiss for being homewreckers, the fate of the war since ancient times. The proof is in the pudding, the paradox of the rape victim being they must, to some degree, speak out with regarding things that are taboo, re, make it taboo again. Source YouTube community post, Bad Empanada 2024, i.e. rape testimonies from educated women to be sure, but also sex education occurring between rape victims, overcoming trauma, part and parcel, so to speak. Kuwu classically amused, insofar as they helped me learn and express myself in ways that led to my PhD. Touching grass, meaning touching ass, conducive to good praxis, also below. Exhibit 34B, 3B, 2A, 2C from My Experiences 2024. Model and photographer Persephone Vanderwaard and Kuwu. Kuwu had to teach me to find self-acceptance and love by playing with them as a genderqueer person who could teach me to love myself amid theatrical devices that accounted for my A, alienation under capital, and B, my new sense of identity inside that liminal position, from different perspectives, lighting, and gendered outfits, etc. Exploitation and liberation exist in the same place, the same shadow zone. In short, I graduated from my sex doll to a doll-like cutie who took the feared side of me into themselves to show me that it wasn't dangerous, i.e. that I was human, as was my hard dick, as were things associated with it. Not so scary at all, but in fact, kind of funny looking, but fun to play with during puppy play and BDSM, as I like to enact it, subbing for topping mommy doms. In short, we were both toy-like and playing with each other's equipment to learn something near about ourselves under capital. They steered me and listened to the cute, noisy sounds I made in bed, wiggly motions I made when I lost control. I returned the favor when playing with them. I learned to trust gifts again, learning as much as I could. That's what my relationship to Kuwu ultimately was, and continues to be. I've explained my PhD before, so I'll merely cite that portion again here, before we get to Bad Empanada's rape apologia, about my PhD, and work based on it, Metroidvania and Ludogothic BDSM, from Masters to PhD, 2025. My PhD is independent, which means it's not peer-reviewed. It also concerns a topic, Ludogothic BDSM, that when I started researching and eventually formalized from early 2019 to October 2023, had zero academic coverage, regarding a knowledge gap that my PhD sought to address by studying Metroidvania, another topic wholly understudied in academia. Even so, Ludogothic BDSM isn't even mentioned in my PhD argument. Capitalism sexualizes everything for the profit motive, using canonical dimorphic Cartesian monstrous poetics to brainwash workers and pit them against each other during capitalist realism. Source, thesis paragraph. The statement doesn't specify Metroidvania, but Metroidvania were the example I used to explore said argument within my PhD, to fill the knowledge gap my PhD was addressing by formulating Ludogothic BDSM and the palliative numinous vis-a-vis Amazons, from Volume 0. My work on Kevin the Canon through Gothic poetics would go on across 5 books to focus extensively on Metroidvania to a lesser extent, and Ludogothic BDSM and the palliative numinous to a greater extent. Source 2 years later, give or take. And, even in 2023, I would only hint at the term's application, Ludogothic BDSM only appears 36 times in my thesis volume, first edition, going on to appear 40, 180, 293, and 357, and the first editions for volumes 1 and 2, parts 1 and 2, respectively, the manifesto followed by the poetry and undead/demon modules. This means that I've not only expanded on the term's application since October 2023, but also revisited and reapplied it numerous times while quoting older sources I wrote. Source concerning rape play, a 2025 note on my development of Ludogothic BDSM. I've certainly received flack regarding my PhD. These barbs range from Bad Empanada, a post-colonial YouTuber who took a hard right turn politically, Ari, the chickens come home to roost, and Bad Empanada calls for genocide, calls trans, plural, and furry folk useless eaters, 2025, up and telling me that BDSM doctors aren't real in 2024. Source, Understanding Vampires, 2024. To have random people approach and accuse me of everything from trying to exploit real sex workers, arguing how I don't do sex work myself or somehow work with other sex workers in bad faith, to faking my PhD and calling myself one to get street cred. I address some of those claims here, but it's not really something I want to focus on. In short, I have better things to do with my time, and don't really want to clog up my own discourse defending my corpus from bad actors. Instead, I wanted to address very quickly as to why I made my PhD independent at all, and why I think that's valuable in today's day and age. Simply put, I made my PhD independent because I chose my own work. I chose to own my work. I.e., these days, universities legally fund, therefore own candidates' research, effectively owning their PhDs too. A Faustian bargain where you sign away your rights to graduate, and where, once you do, the university can do whatever it wants with your work. Worse, a rise in fascism is seeing entire departments shuttered by having their funding pulled, but also from censorship laws. So I didn't want to make things harder on myself, and archiving my work by having it tied to a university body that, with its feet held to the coals, might suddenly decide to throw years of research I produced in a vault. Yet you'd be surprised by the number of people who had automatically devalued what I produced because of that, and furthermore they assumed that I must be up to no good, i.e., despite my merely wanting to own my work, thus be better able to archive it and share it with others for free. Academia isn't some magical place where everyone is morally inclined above critique. Quite the contrary, plenty of researchers steal from each other at a systemic level, seeking fame and fortune through problematic institutions like the Nobel Institute, while taking credit for other people's work. Furthermore, academia is bigoted and exclusionary as a whole, with shit rolling downhill through the usual pecking orders, e.g. PhD departments foisting grunt work off onto PhD candidates, and PhD candidates off onto graduate students, etc. To it, having your work peer-reviewed isn't a guarantee of quality. For example, a recent scandal by Solomon Nelson has thoroughly exposed Dr. Mike Israetel's work to have been subpar, both in terms of the overall nuts and bolts, spelling, and grammar, but also its contributions to a larger body of knowledge. Mike Israetel's PhD, The Biggest Academic Sham in Fitness, 2025. To be fair, I don't even like Solomon as a person. White moderates don't challenge fascism, 2025, but he's still correct about Mike, or at the very least, his assessment was grounded, ironically enough, in the very ideas of peer review that many who abuse academic credentials celebrate for themselves, double standards and all that. The general consensus seems to be that Mike got it for street cred, a fact he leverages every chance he gets, i.e. by calling himself a doctor because technically he is one, i.e. from having gotten his PhD at an accredited university, yet here we are watching that not really amount to much in real time. By comparison, I'm not technically a doctor because I don't have my PhD from a real university. Instead, I got my master's in Gothic Studies from MMU and built on it independently through my nonprofit book series. To it, the work I've done is extensive, holistic, and iconoclastic enough that I've readily accepted being independent early on, meaning by 2021, after COVID, dashed my plans for PhD candidacy. I certainly applied for candidacy and also wrote submissions for journals and attended conferences. But in the end, all of that seemed less important than the work itself. So that is what I chose to focus on. I didn't want to compromise said work by devoting myself to the blood sport that is academic life. Source, Arludic Masters, 2021. The reality is I am educated, but also being accused of rape by Bad Empanada, a dishonest and cowardly rape apologist, anti-intellectual nerd, and someone far less educated and sexually active than I am, and if he says otherwise, I'll respond, prove it, nerd, but also, sex work is work, you incel. So without further ado, let's get to it, shall we? Hold your noses, it's gonna get smelly. Traitors stink. Raising awareness about Bad Empanada's abusive behaviors. Returning to the matter at hand, I'm currently reaching out regarding Bad Empanada, as someone who has been crashing out in recent months, see the chickens come home to roost, transfer Bad Empanada goes mask off. His fascist tendencies towards minorities, see above. Essay, as well as slurs on activism, with more citations in my postscript. In short, I've been documenting this evidence for some time, since February 2024, and slowly releasing it on my website and in my books, but also on my blog and YouTube channel, where I'm less active. In light of this mounting evidence and Bad Empanada's flagrant bigotry and grifter hypocrisy, I'm trying to raise awareness regarding his recent actions, but also those supporting him, e.g. Bad Empanada again calling for slave labor against his critics and labeling minorities useless eaters, see evidence below. All the deprogrammed and its leads, Second Thought, Hakim, and Yugopnik, continue to endorse Bad Empanada anyways, i.e. In The Fire Will Cease, featuring Bad Empanada, episode 166. By keeping said episode up and plugging his stuff, but saying nothing about his recent crash outs. As a small channel and trans sex worker to boot, I'm not sure what else to do but appeal to larger creators to see if anyone GNC or otherwise will comment on the story. Bad Empanada is a SWERF, but so are these men for shamelessly supporting him. They're turning a blind eye to fascism in their own backyard, which makes me question their own beliefs when push comes to shove. Hope to hear from you, and thank you for your time. Purse. My total evidence. P.S. Here's my total evidence on Bad Empanada, both written and video, as well as my larger body of work said coverage ties to. My written work on Bad Empanada, Slurs Aren't Activism, July 14th, 2025. The Chickens Come Home to Roost, September 5th, 2025. My 18 and up book chapter on Bad Empanada, A Marx's Use of Vampire Metaphor to Critique Capitalism, Understanding Vampires, August 20th, 2024. Bushnell's Requiem, an Ode to a Martyr, vis-a-vis Bad Empanada and Aaron Bushnell, February 29th, 2024. Exhibit 0, top, an email I wrote to Bad Empanada after his arrogant and hairless devaluing of Aaron Bushnell. Americans demand I praise, U.S. soldier who self-immolated to protest Gaza genocide 2024. With me urging solidarity from Bad Empanada with an anarchist martyr and their decision to protest .a dead. Bottom left, the same message shared on his February 29th community post. Bottom right, Source Street, Scott Crow, sharing memories of Aaron Bushnell, February 29th, 2024. Bad Empanada never responded. We should not live in a world that requires human sacrifice to make an important political statement on the value of human life, my partner Bay Ryan would reply. February 2024 was a rough month. Capitalism has no use for people who see each other as human, a wrote of Next Benedict. It wants us dehumanizing ourselves so capital can function as normal. Moving money through nature at the cost of human life. Capitalism needs us to die, so we need to remember and honor Nexus humanity. A day later, I would also write of Aaron. Aaron Bushnell believed in something greater than himself, and died to uphold it by making his name synonymous with self-sacrifice, ending the Palestinian genocide by martyring himself with the Imperial Court. He died a hero for that cause, and should be remembered as one, not dismissed for it. Source, Bushnell's Requiem. Now as things come full circle, we see just how lacking Bad Empanada's own humanity is. My YouTube videos on Bad Empanada. React number 28. Bad Empanada calls for political violence against critic calling him fascist. October 16th, 2025. React number 27. Bad Empanada calls for genocide. Calls trans, plural, and furry folk useless eaters. October 3rd, 2025. Essay number 7. Transphobe Bad Empanada goes mask off. September 6th, 2025. Essay number 4. Slurs Aren't Activism. Critiquing ContraPoint Zionism plus her narcissism. July 15th, 2025. Addressing Bad Empanada Lives, Relative Transphobia. July 3rd, 2025. I Sex Doctor, About Me, Ludogothic BDSM, and the Work That I Do. August 15th, 2024. You can support Palestine without being a Nazi, but Bad Empanada fails that challenge. Compare these leaked messages from young GOP leaders to his openly fascist rhetoric. It's the same rhetoric, so don't be fooled. Just because BE supports Palestine, he's still a Nazi, ipso facto, like Marjorie Taylor Greene. Some additional sources for my latest, React number 28, Bad Empanada calls for political violence against critic calling him fascist, but also from my above 18 and up Blue Sky account post. Bad Empanada being ableist. September 29th, 2025. Bad Empanada calling his political targets useless eaters, October 1st, 2025. Bad Empanada calling for political violence against critics, me, above, October 8th, 2025. American fascist Bad Empanada sounds like, October 14th, 2025. Dr. Uncola's 2023, the USSR under Lenin was the world leader in gay rights and gender-corrective surgery for more than a decade, tweet, versus Bad Empanada calling for people like me to be dealt with, meaning those who talk about sex like it's their main interest, make it taboo again, i.e. just like Stalin did in 1934, a year after Hitler burned the Institute of Sexology to the ground, and regressing Lenin's sweeping progressive reforms back towards Tsarist methods of queerphobic abuse, read Pogroms, Gulags, RE from Volume 2's Undead Module. Originally from a 2024 community post Bad Empanada made, saying people who talk about sex constantly and openly like it's their main interest must be dealt with, make it taboo again, followed by him responding to me in saying BDSM doctors aren't real when I called myself one, which I am. According to him, I, a BDSM doctor and trans woman, am not real, thus neither are sex therapists and paid, unpaid researchers, apparently, source Understanding Vampires, What is Problematic Love, or Positions of Relative Ignorance to Relative Clarity, featuring Bad Empanada and Marxist-Leninism, 2024. Notes on Lenin, Stalin, and why Marxist-Leninism historically sucks for women and queer people, with Bad Empanada being functionally Marxist-Leninist. As a Gothic gay anarcho-communist, I really don't like Marxist-Leninism, because historically it's largely a bunch of straight white guys acting like pimps towards women and queer people. My critique of Marxist-Leninism, and preface, Gothic gay anarcho-communism, or synthesizing emotional Gothic intelligence to a sex-positive Gothic mode, 2024. First, a few things Gothic communism tends to avoid theory-wise. Gothic communism strongly dislikes pure, post-structuralist, psychoanalytical, e.g. Freud, Jung, and Lacan, and Marxist-Leninist models, though it employs many of their ideas in ANCOM ways. Not only do these models tend to be dated, vaguely abstracting and sexist queerphobic, as Stalin and Freud both were above, but they are far more common in Gothic academia than I would like. Instead, I wrote sex positivity to marry Gothic queer theory with Marxist dialectical material analysis, oppositional praxis, a process I've decided to call Gothic gay anarcho-communism. To be as thorough as I can, then, here is my definition of Marxist-Leninism alongside the abridged definition of Gothic gay anarcho-communism and anarcho-communism. Marxist-Leninism, tankies, an embryonic form of socialism that past and present favors state models and nostalgia, one that hybridizes Marx and Engels with 20th century thinkers and leaders, most notably Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin, but also Mao, Castro, and other state leaders' schools going into the 21st, through tanky apologia whitewashing the crimes of said leaders and their states as beings to worship and compromise with, Bad Mouses on Hakim's Nuance, 2025. Anarcho-communism, the gradual dissolution and transmutation of capitalism into socialism, and finally communism through direct worker solidarity and collective action versus state mechanism and argument, whereupon power is horizontally restructured away from state models and Marxist-Leninism and state power, state-regulated capitalism. Gothic gay anarcho-communism, abridged full definition in paratextual documents. The titular term from my book series, so I'll quote the whole thing here, expanded and updated substantially since 2023 in 2025 to account for my writing of 4 books after Volume 0. Coined by me, Gothic gay anarcho-communism is the deliberate, pointed critique of capitalism and the state using a unique marriage of Gothic, queer, game theory, and semi-Marxist ANCOM ideas synthesized campily by sex-positive workers during proletarian praxis, developing systemic catharsis, mid-liminal expression during praxial opposition, using Little Gothic BDSM and palliative numinous dialogues, e.g. Metroidvania. Beyond my understanding of the term, Marxist-Leninism was actually coined by Stalin and or around the time Lenin died in the 1920s. From Wikipedia, Marxism-Leninism was developed from Bolshevism by Joseph Stalin in the 1920s, based on his understanding and synthesis of classical Marxism and Leninism. Marxism-Leninism holds that a two-stage communist revolution is needed to replace capitalism. And Stalin, let's not forget, was a total and massive cunt, who among many other things besides, enabled pedophilia in his own inner circle, behind the bastards Beria, Stalin's pedophile cop, and the Soviet Oppenheimer, made homosexuality illegal in 1934, the year after Hitler burned down Magnus Hirschfeld's Institute of Sexology, and all in all displaced a shitload of people, millions, to reinforce his own cult of personality, e.g. Stalingrad, arguably the biggest battle in modern or medieval history, was strategically worthless to the Russians or the Germans, i.e. Stalin wanted the city defended and Hitler to conquer it, costing over 1 million soldiers on both sides because it had Stalin in the name. If that's not vanity, I don't know what is. These men were not gods, nor should we treat them as such. They were the ruling class, and one whose state capitalism, on Stalin's side, was largely nominal in its historical execution of communism, and yes, the West undercut it, but Stalin and the Politburo that survived him still upheld the sickle during the harvest. This being said, Stalinist Bolshevism isn't identical to Hitler's National Socialism, but both men were dictators nonetheless, as was Mao, and by extension, American presidents, British monarchs, and so on. In doing so, Middle Gothic BDSM to develop Gothic anarcho-communism. We're not here to worship these darlings, but kill their legacies by camping their ghosts, and that of their offshoots, e.g. Creed, Kristeva, Butler, Foucault, Bad Empanada, etc., i.e. The State is Straight, and ASAB from the Undead modules Understanding Vampires. To it, Bad Empanada is a Marxist-Leninist, valuing the material element to Marxist analysis, but also state mechanisms, i.e. he doesn't condone or support anarcho-communism, treating its practitioners like hopeless hedonists, and as I shall explain, sex past to lumping with genuine predators. Emphasis me, Skeet, Bad Empanada, October 28, 2025. Except the State is Straight, historically the ultimate and constant enemy, selling out and wearing down to abuse its own people, i.e. as expressed by Bad Empanada himself towards me and others like me. The State, whether it calls itself socialist or capitalist, always prioritizes us fags and sex workers when the state of exception narrows. Consider this sentence the Gothic, queer, and thoroughly anarchist thesis argument for understanding vampires. We can't afford to be strictly material in our investigations of capital because much of praxis and its synthesis in our daily lives comes from the social component of media, i.e. that it's produced as much by workers as corporations. On gay rights and its history of abuse in the Soviet Union, I strongly recommend Revolutionary Thoughts, Why Did the USSR Recriminalize Homosexuality, and What Was Life Like for Trans People in the Soviet Union. See also my Understanding Vampires chapter, which discusses Marxist-Leninism and queerphobia alongside Bad Empanada above and below. In other words, all bigotries are extant under capital, endemic to a struggle that occurs across all registers. We must push for intersectional solidarity and consciousness versus these internal-external factors, i.e. while synthesizing praxis that makes workers collectively more intelligent and aware of necessary struggle, a pedagogy of the oppressed, healing from rape by systemically reducing state capacities for harm. This includes Stalin and company's harming of queer folk, or in Chemical Mind's own words from his aforementioned book above. Most gays, this frankly sounds a little odd coming from a non-queer person, i.e. the gays, e.g. similar to calling POCs blacks, were either executed or lost status under Stalin, but that doesn't change the fact that the earliest Soviet Union pre-Stalin was relatively progressive in this regard. Ultimately, though, I want to make it clear that the persecution of LGBT people was not just a failure, but one of the Soviet Union's greatest failures that remained largely unrectified by the time of the Soviet Union's fall. Source: People from Another World, a reappraisal of the USSR. Revolutionary Thought would say in their own video on trans people in the Soviet Union, the USSR certainly wasn't a queer utopia. Indeed, Marxist-Leninism surrounding queer people is generally a conversation that boils down to, they sucked, but the West was worse. Sure, but the USSR still sucked for queer people, its larger Achilles heel being the state apparatus and tendency to decay into capitalism through proletarian dictatorship below. Source: John Westmoreland's Did Lenin Inevitably Lead to Stalin? 2020. Correction: Stalin and Company. Stalin and Company regressed the rights of women and queer people, he and the other heads of state putting wartime women back in the kitchen after World War II, i.e. Red Pen's Women at War communism, and again re-outlawing homosexuality until 1993, 40 years after Stalin died and de-Stalinization had gone into effect, e.g. the Sino-Soviet split. The decriminalizing of queer rights happened in 1922 and in 1926, and the RSFSR and the Ukrainian SSR, Ari Unkola, only to recriminalize in 1934, with Soviet cis women hobbled after World War II at the tail end of Stalin and company's rule. Ari Red Pen. However, Lenin and Stalin were pals, insofar as Lenin believed the abolition of classes is impossible without a dictatorship of the oppressed class of the proletariat. Source: Lenin's on the slogan for United States of Europe 1915 cited the Red Spectres against Trotskyism, i.e. Stalin was Lenin's chosen dictatorial successor. Furthermore, they were trusted friends. As the Red Spectre writes, I don't even know how this myth of Lenin hating Stalin, loving Trotsky came to be. It's so wrong, but for some reason will not die. Somehow the same Lenin which called Stalin a marvelous Georgian hated him. Fair enough, we cannot expect Trotskyists to have a grasp of how friendships work. Source: against Trotskyism. For what it's worth, Ben Empanada also thinks that Trotsky's a hero. So if there's any truth to what Spectre says, then that could explain Ben Empanada's lack of understanding regarding human connection. Not that I think that Lenin or Stalin were nicer than Trotsky, who they exiled and murdered. Source: YouTube comments badmouses the Kronstadt Revolt, Marxist-Leninist Myths 3, 2025. Spectre goes on to add a variety of sources arguing how Lenin had groomed Stalin to be his revolutionary heir, not from Stalin's accounts, but from Lenin's. It is terribly difficult to do this. We lack the men. But Preobrazhensky comes along and airily says that Stalin has jobs in 2 commissariats. Who among us has not sinned in this way? Who has not undertaken several duties at once? And how can we do otherwise? What can we do to preserve the present situation in the People's Commissariat of Nationalities? To handle all the Turkestan, Caucasian, and other questions? These are questions that have engaged the attention of European states for hundreds of years, and only an infinitesimal number of them have been settled in democratic republics. We are settling them, and we need a man to whom the representatives of any of these nations can go and discuss their difficulties in detail. Where can we find such a man? I don't think Comrade Preobrazhensky could suggest any better candidate than Comrade Stalin. Emphasis me. Source: Lenin, 11th Congress of the RCPB, 1922. Source: The Gay Liberator, number 42, 1974, cited Persephone Vanderwert's Making Marx Gay. To it, Marxist-Leninism may have come from Stalin directly, but he married Marx and Lenin together in ways that Lenin obviously had a profound impact on, and Marx and Engels' own homophobia impacting both men above. Whatever concessions were made regarding queer women's rights were ultimately rescinded, replaced with the usual abuses that defenders of Stalin apologize for under current regimes. Or as I write regarding Bad Empanada, Stalin and Bad Empanada emulating Stalin by dismissing my arguments out of hand from the undead module. Try to understand that it is both possible to be right and wrong at the same time, as you often are. E.g. Beethoven was right, but not always. See Napoleon, R.E. John Clubb. He was also a massive prick who alienated just about everyone around him, and Stalin, despite outlawing homosexuality and the Union, had a pedophile best friend who raped little girls for fun. In either case, denouncing or otherwise poo-pooing such critiques by focusing on what your political, academic rivals' actual or perceived flaws are, attached to their queer character, as you so often do, is itself thoroughly bad praxis. Source: Understanding Vampires. Source: Sakshis Venkatramans, Russian Voters Back Referendum Banning Same-Sex Marriage, 2020. This isn't just Bad Empanada defending Stalin, though, but Lenin using Stalin to fall into the very queerphobic traps that harm the image of communism well into the present, with Putin above outlawing gay marriage in 2020. Please bear in mind, we'll look at Lenin's refreshingly queer-friendly exceptions, but also his tragic failure to keep Stalin and Soviet regression with fascism in check. When we examine Dr. Unkola's tweets about early Soviet queer progressivism and leaving the closet. An important disclaimer, however, is that the national attitude towards gay and trans people wasn't unanimously supportive. While many were sympathetic or ambivalent, there was a faction of the Bolsheviks who wanted to outlaw it again. Among them was this guy. You might know him. Shows photo of Stalin. Source tweet: Dr. Unkola, July 1st, 2023. In short, there was no place for gay people in their view of the world when push came to shove. It got well unpacked this more when we look at Stalin. From Stalin onwards, and Mao too and all of their imitators, Marxist-Leninism decays under threat of force to sacrifice queer rights that spiral towards nominal communist fragmentation and neoliberal capitalism and Marxist capitalist realism, i.e. said states and their cops abusing the environment and nature at great expense of worker and animal life and contributing towards climate change as all states do. All states are bad, ASAP, including Madame Empanada's unironically Stalinist rhetoric, make it illegal, taboo, again. We need to meaningfully challenge all of these inherited confusions and misconceptions, lest we fall into the same dogmatic pitfalls and academic cis-het hubris that people like Madame Empanada are currently doing in their own mixed work, i.e. using veiled sodomy argumentation, i.e. BDSM bans, to actively close their minds, punching down to help one group at the cost of another by demonizing the latter having its own equally valid concerns. Again, my criticism speaks not to Madame Empanada's rightful treatment of Jesse Gender as Zionist, but to his weird dog whistling, calling all discussions of sex, except his, to be made taboo. Ibid. Dictators are no different than kings, and to call them necessary is to apologize for them and their abuse in all the usual ways. It's dangerous to lionize dictators outright, including their enablers, and while Lenin and Stalin helped usher in queer/women's rights for a small love-bombing window during the interwar period, those men surviving Lenin, including Stalin and Trotsky, quickly rescinded these rights, because the state is straight, patriarchal, and frankly so are many Marxist-Leninists, e.g. those like Second Thought, Hakim, and Ugopnik, supporting Madame Empanada despite me asking them not to. Red text. And for anyone saying these men somehow didn't know who Madame Empanada was while working together, I'm sorry, but that's bullshit. The man has a long-standing reputation for being an outspoken dick. Big channels stick to the algorithm and its metrics like glue, and anyone saying otherwise is defending toxicity within their own movement. Ignoring all the evidence given here, do you really expect me to believe you didn't do a background check on him? That you didn't hear him saying ableist and transphobic slurs in his videos? In your own subreddit? What kind of fool do you take me for? A blind eye is a blind eye, and all three of you are turning it pretty fucking hard. Furthermore, just because I'm not the kind of victim you want, an ANCOM trans sex worker versus a white and or straight Marxist-Leninist, doesn't make your inaction any less bigoted, moderate in its stonewalling and plausible deniability. Intent and ignorance don't matter, outcomes do. Stop making exceptions for you and yours. So when I say, to make Marx gay, therefore Stalin and Lenin as emblems of communism, I don't mean apologize for the men themselves by slapping rainbows on them, a kind of rainbow capitalism, but also socialist realism that views the past through rose-tinted glasses above. We have to kill our darlings and move on to something better than all of them combined. To that, Lenin and Stalin were two sides of the same baneful coin, poisoning Marxism, which already wasn't perfect, i.e. with conservative elements that turned women like Alexandra Kollontai into a victim. With the defeat of the workers' opposition, Kollontai appeared to give up her fight for reform and for women, retreating into relative obscurity. With the rise of Stalin, her life became one of de facto exile, although formally she was USSR diplomat for Mexico and Norway before settling in Sweden. She was thus the female diplomat in Western history, dying of natural causes in 1952. Kollontai was the only member of the workers' opposition to survive the purges, emphasis me. She lived the last 20 years of her life in constant fear of assassination or imprisonment. Source, Jenny Morrison's Women on the Left, Alexandra Kollontai, 2012. As I write, so it sounds like Lenin was more inclusive than Marx and Engels, right? Sure, points for Lenin for not closeting queers and kettling, staking them like vampires. A low bar, but one he fairly met. The problem is Lenin needed muscle for his revolution, and Stalin, a Georgian gangster and Lenin's right-hand man, filled that role. But once Lenin died in 1924, Stalin began to muscle in prey on Lenin's former operation, and even before his death, let's be honest. He exiled Trotsky in 1929 and enacted the first of the purges in 1938, only to kill Trotsky while the other man was in exile in 1940. Between those, he also made homosexuality illegal in 1934, the year after the Nazis burned Hirschfeld's Sexology Institute to ashes. Source, Leaving the Closet, 2024. Yet, you still have chat rooms and comment sections celebrating these men like they were gods. Stalin and company had already outlawed queerness in 1930. Had already outlawed queerness in 1934, and a year later would be cozying up to Hitler to divvy up Poland. i.e., as imperialist ergo capitalists do according to plan, i.e., Lenin's necessary dictatorship of the proletariat, one that arbitrarily brutalized the routine of older regimes by men suddenly able to be king for a day. Just because the Nazis called themselves socialists doesn't mean they functioned as such. The same goes for Lenin and Stalin, the latter who didn't usher in a golden age of communism through Marxist-Leninism after Lenin's death, despite calling himself a communist. He befriended the fascists, imitating some of their worst aspects before failing to assign anyone to succeed him, the same issue Mao had, and one Lenin, rather short-sighted in hindsight, didn't seem to account for. The state and its machinery are historically treacherous, decaying towards fascism by making deals with fascists, German or American in Stalin's case. So, despite Socialism for All saying don't be that guy regarding bad empanada, which is valid below, his channel seems to have more Stalinist apologia in it, jacking Stalin off as some kind of well-spoken charmer versus any valid extended critiques of the guy. It's not Red Scare or horseshoe theory to critique tankies, my dudes. And it takes more than pretty words from men of great violence and power to win over their usual historical victims. Socialism for all, you say? Unless you're gay, right? Fascism is a system of exceptions, one of the first exceptions that Stalin made to he and Lenin's dictatorship of the proletariat, queer folk, followed by women, or as Marx himself wrote, capital is dead labor, which vampire-like lives only by sucking living labor, and lives the more labor it sucks. Source, Limits of the Working Day, 1867. How apt given how much Stalin and company suck, but also bad empanada in ways that uphold these two-faced cunts. Or as my partner Bay puts it, late-stage capital is a fallacy. Capitalism was born to decay, mortality trying to outrun itself, i.e. in a world for which immortality doesn't exist, requires too much to exist. Even supermassive black holes aren't immortal. As for bad empanada, he's everything I hate about Marxist-Leninism and incels, but so are her stupid friends defending him in bad faith. Source Skeet, Vanguard Art, to Johnny the Wolf's reply, November 6, 2025. He's not just ableist, he punches down at trans folk, furry folk, sex workers, disabled people, and the neurodivergent, among others, e.g. Indigenous people who don't agree with him. He's a TERF and a SWERF who you're defending like a battered fucking housewife. No parasocial relationship. My ass. Note, for some excellent critiques of Marxist-Leninism, refer to Bad Mouse's Marxist-Leninist Myths series, e.g. the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and the state-level KFAB that implied, 2025, and the defeatist arguments of Stalinism, 2025, i.e. concerning the state through Stalin's dictatorship, saying trust me bro, before enacting various disastrous policies before and after his death, e.g. the Holodomor famine, and Chelyabinsk 40, with Bad Empanada defending the famine by saying it was just government incompetence that caused all those deaths. The Holodomor genocide question 2022, while the latter was not only installed before Stalin died in 1945, source Alan Bellows in Soviet Russia Lake Contaminates You, below 2008, but whose environmental damage was the direct result of its own lies and incompetency. False nuclear is almost as bad as Chernobyl, 2025. Marxist-Leninism was bad for people, male, female, or intersex, and the environment. Regarding state-level KFAB, I guess we'll read that. We'll read that in a moment. Regarding Marxist-Leninism was bad for people and the environment. To that, most ANCOMs are environmentalists, whereas the Soviet state did plenty of fucked up shit to the environment, e.g. the Holodomor famine, but also late Soviet-era cotton monoculture, fertilizer, mismanagement, and evaporation of the Aral Sea. Source New Scientists, Soviet cotton threatens a regional seize and its children, 1989. Chelyabinsk 40, and the USSR's production and storage of nuclear waste, source Alan Bellows in Soviet Russia. And of course, the initial infamous suppression of the 1986 Chernobyl disaster, which, while oversold by HBO many years later under neoliberal Red Scare, was still a terrible event and black eye for non-militarized nuclear power in the Western Bloc. Combined, it's not exactly a surprise the country is romanticized post-hoc as a nuclear wasteland, i.e. there's some truth to it. Abuse of the environment is historically queerphobic in ways Marxist-Leninism was not above doing. Per Mao and Stalin, they rapidly industrialized to militarily compete with the United States. This worked. that led to great famines and ecological disasters, if not equivalent to neoliberal capitalism currently, then certainly the lesser of two evils, emphasis on evil there. Except such deflective gambits didn't lead them to defeat the United States, i.e. the Soviets sold out long before the fall, and China is only nominally communist as they presently exist, source leaving the closet. In other words, queerphobia and environmental destruction, per Marxist-Leninism, historically go hand in hand, i.e., if you're looking the other way regarding the harming of one, chances are you'll do so for the other too. Stalin and Mao certainly did, grinding people up like meat to a similar wide-scale degree as Hitler or the Americans. Why? Because Marxist-Leninism argues for a dictatorship, meaning with capitalistic effects that occur when capital bullies it into paranoia. That's not a question of if. The primary difference between bullied MLs and ANCOMs being ANCOMs don't have the levers of state power when leaning to the right. ASAB, ADAB, all states and dictators are bad. Regarding state-level KFAB, i.e. the secret protocols of a non-aggression pact between the two nations, Time Ghost History, 2020, the subsequent spheres of influence meant for them to wage war against Europe in all the usual imperialist ways. Not that Europe isn't an imperial power, but I digress. Carving up older territories into newer shapes by current heads of state, military leaders acting as dictators do, the protocols denied by the Soviets until 1989. The Congress of People's Deputies of the Soviet Union declares the secret protocols of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact null and void and invalid from the moment of their signing. Source: Communist Crimes. States lie to workers by design, but those reasons can still have a lot going on, i.e. the curious case of the Soviets and the Nazis more a case of strange bedfellows than straight-up ride and die. No honor among thieves, the biggest thieves being nation-states. In Time Ghost's own words, the pinned comment in their video's comment section, is the Soviet Union basically an Axis power between 1939 and 1941? Technically the answer is a definite no, because the USSR will never sign the Tripartite Pact, but it's still worth thinking about. The USSR and Nazi Germany will cultivate a pretty productive relationship after they sign the non-aggression treaty, only prompting a joint occupation of Poland, but not only prompting a joint occupation of Poland, but also allowing Hitler to invade Western Europe without having to worry about his eastern borders. So when you look at it like that, the USSR directly supported the Nazi war machine. On the other hand, it is probably a bit of a leap to blame the USSR for Nazi expansionism, and Stalin is forced by circumstance to enter into the pact. The USSR is not ready to fight a war at this point, and the treaty buys not only time, but also space, creating a virtual buffer zone between Germany and the motherland. In the form of Poland. Cynical and calculated, yes, but that's diplomacy for you. Stalin will obviously offer a very extreme interpretation of the second argument after the war, casting Soviet actions as necessary defensive measures against the imperialism of the Western powers and their supposed encouragement of Nazi Germany. Stalinist myth-making aside, the argument that defensive considerations is a significant factor in the Soviets signing the pact does have some merit. Again, the necessity of dictators per Lenin does a lot of heavy lifting, give Stalin carte blanche post hoc, i.e. when you see the Soviets invading Poland, Finland, and elsewhere, basically gobbling up everything in sight to protect the Soviet project and its leaders, their heroic cults of personality, ergo death, eco, the citizens of these countries generally casualties in all the usual ways. Theirs was a friendship signed in blood, Stalin said of Hitler and himself after Poland's invasion. Real-time History's Blitzkrieg Unleashed, World War II, 1939-1940, 2025. Rape is rape, necessary or not. Source: Matt Whitaker's What Was the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, 2023. Mind you, Stalin also said this after his own terrorism purges before 1939, the very dictatorship Lenin called necessary before he died, and one he helped facilitate in ways that led to similar degrees of starvation and bloodshed normally enacted by their ideological enemies. Sadly, horseshoe theory isn't total BS, though it classically apologizes for American genocide, Western liberalism, and Pax Americana through foreign interference on the world stage, i.e. nation-states all kind of suck, only differing in a flavor and degree of said sucking, and our Gothic Ancom's criticism of them holistically below. Source: Stephen Cole's USA Suppresses All the Genocide Records, poster and fact sheet, 2016, cited Symposium Aftercare, What is the Gothic, 2023. For Stalin and his supporters, which included the U.S. during World War II, calling Stalin Uncle Joe, the vampiric function of capital and state power remained, one in which such devastation would continue indiscriminately for decades into the present, in which some MLs today continue to apologize for regarding Stalin and men like him, Lenin's flaw, and that of those fighting fire with fire in his and Marx's name, being how the Bolsheviks, at least for some of their victims, i.e. women and gay people, became functionally indistinguishable from the Nazis, e.g. no functional difference between Russian gulags and Nazi concentration camps. The same goes for the Chinese in their own nominal communism, as we'll see with Mao. The MLs defending the Soviets then put all their eggs into one basket, centering power around state leaders who historically embody all the usual flaws state power affords, meaning versus anarcho-communism teaching society as a whole not to worship vertical power, but instead distribute knowledge, a form of power, evenly among workers, not leaders, i.e. in horizontal forms, that actually strengthen the movement over time. R.E. Stalin left no heir, and those who succeeded him leaned into the same imperial character he himself had done, that ultimately decayed backwards, e.g. Afghanistan. Exhibit 3, artist top, far left, Li Chunhua, top, mid left, Jacques Louis David, bottom left, Chen Yanning, top right, Bungie, bottom right, William Blake. City or nation state revolutionaries and their poppy red sanguine historically decay into tyranny, from Caesar to Vlad Dracul, the dragon a symbol of status, sex, and power, to Napoleon, to George Washington, to Mao, both in and out of fiction, with purely fictional additions, e.g. Shakespeare's historical play and its famous line, Et tu, Brute, actually gigantic vampire hauntologies that bear a non-fictional stamp, e.g. Balor the Leveler and his own dragon's red cape of power, top right, built on top of stories of stories of stories, i.e. the narrative of the crypt. R.E. from Hogel's The Restless Labyrinth, Cryptonomy in the Gothic Novel, 1980. However cryptomimetic these seem, they nonetheless bear a kernel of truth, as all vampires do. Dictators suck, stemming from and venerated by city-states to nation-states in ways that historically materially decay due to the fallibility of men and corruptibility of the structures propping them up. They're what Marx would describe as the tradition of all generations that weighs like a nightmare on the brains of the living. While history repeats first in tragedy, then in farce. Source, Marx's 18th Brumaire, 1852. Of Napoleon, for example, Beethoven would excoriate his own betrayals. On May 18, 1808, the French Council of State declared Napoleon Emperor of the French, and upon hearing the news, an angry Beethoven crossed off the Eroka's first inscription to Bonaparte. So he, too, is nothing more than an ordinary man, he cried out. Source, John Club's Beethoven, Byron, and Bonaparte. In keeping with the vampirism of such personas, there is a second red-caped version of Napoleon crossing the Alps, such auto-apologia cryptomimetically reviving specters of Caesar into the present space and time, czars or chairmen, for Mao and Stalin to imitate in dated, dishonest, starstruck ways, i.e. with nation-building around their own cults of strength, hopelessly stuck in the same tyrannical time-space mood of angry short men who think they're center of the universe, a repeatable echoed syndrome. See Bad Dreams Part 3, The Monomyth and Cycle of Kings, for an exhaustive look at this concept in and out of media, below. For example, Chen Yanning's 1972 painting shows Mao leading the people after the famines he helped cause. One that remains hopelessly stuck in a similar vein of apologia is David's ahistorical portrait of Napoleon, called the Ogre by his enemies, while abusing state models using state propaganda. Of Yanning's work, Dr. Christian Loring Brennan writes, and Chairman Mao en route to Anyuan, Li Chunhua adapted Chinese landscape conventions to a new style and purpose, an evocative portrayal that suggested that Mao was capable of leading the country towards revolution. He pictured his subject emerging atop a mountain with clouds and mist below. In China, landscapes such as this often evoked immortal realms or extraordinary sights invested with the misty vapors of the mountain. However, a telephone pole is discernible in the lower left corner of the composition, and water cascades from a dam in the right, hints of modernity within the ethereal landscape. With an umbrella tucked beneath one arm and the other hand clenched into a fist, and wearing windswept robes, Mao appears superhuman, yet also practical and charismatic. As a prominent icon in the Cultural Revolution, Chairman Mao, en route to Anyuan, celebrated the grassroots nature of revolutionary history and cultivated devotion to Mao during a tumultuous time. As a brilliant example of Chinese Communist Party propaganda, it was reportedly reproduced over 900 million times and distributed widely in print, sculpture, and other media. Such relics are, in turn, Hogel's Ghost of the Counterfeit, the forgery of power in ways to enact its charlatan continuation to performance and lie, going ethically in hand, i.e., with their tragic rediscovery later in the same epic, the Promethean quest being partly to steal power from the past to commit new atrocities with. Under such oppressive, surveilling conditions, a pastoral backwater easily becomes a killing field, one where the owner class, and those aping them below, attack their victims with endless impunity, expressing total ownership over in perpetuity, laying everything to waste, R.E. Ozymandias's colossal wreck. So the Promethean quest steals power from the past as genocidal, marked cryptomimetically by ghosts of genocide to steal power from again and again, doing so out of perpetual, at times indiscriminate revenge. Source: Persephone's Silksong Symposium. Found later still by enterprising men like Ben Empanada and his fans, other MLs in the internet age. A lot of them play follow the leader, i.e. as a ghost to capture and harness, doing so with the hopes of one day standing in their mighty shoes, drilling in Ozymandias's colossal wreck, eager to shamelessly defend without necessary campaign criticism. To apologize for dictators is to apologize for states, thus capital and the numinous power. Abuse, therefore rape, they mendaciously and traitorously enact on ordinary people. Rape is rape, torture is torture, starvation is starvation. Only the state, nation, or city capable of such things to the degree dictators historically carry out, exceptions being made for nomadic conquerors like Genghis Khan and Tamerlane. Speaking of which, this state vampirism includes Mao and his own atrocities after Stalin bought the farm, on the backs of the workers he lied to and exploited, supping in the blood of the proletariat, and all the ways Marx warned about, i.e. so-called dead labor, suddenly personified, a master vampire within structures and mastery that maintains a pyramid structure, the thralls at the bottom serving those higher up, with apex predators like Mao at the tippy top, while people past, present, and future continue to defend him. Let's not. Source: Jonathan Chatwin's The Girls Mao Zedong Had Sex With. Also, the collage that I was reading from. And Skeletor. And this Hollow Knight image. Note, these portions are ultimately surveys of dictators tied to larger ideas I've explored via Marx, elsewhere, re Understanding Vampires, and The World is a Vampire. Regarding Mao, here's a small addendum of Mao, if only because Bad Empanada and his community below seemingly worship the man. R.E. Bad Empanada's 2024 YouTube community post asking for the discussion of sex to be made taboo, reading in ways not unlike Stalin but also Mao, boundaries for others, not them. As a Maoist, I only fuck with theory. BP true and devout Maoist confirmed. Calling for the policing of sex is a classic pimp tactic, and Mao was certainly a pimp, e.g. Young Chang's Was Mao a Maoist, or Mao? The Unknown Story, discussing Mao's myth-making is equally pimp-like, i.e. dictators exhibiting a fair degree of reinvention through their lives built on kernels of truth, with Mao being an excellent guerrilla who outmaneuvered and survived 1930s Chinese nationalism, only to replace outdo it murder-wise. Indeed, dictators embody capital's ravenous vampiric qualities that Marx warned about, i.e. they're heads of state, and the state eats everything while lying about it, dead labor feeding on living labor, insofar as dictators take on machine-like qualities when alive. So when the Cambodian genocide under Pol Pot, an event antagonized between rival nations and Western bombing campaigns, led to an auto-genocide, for example, R.E. from Volume 3's Defined Through Sex, Sex Normativity in Popular Media, below, 2025, various forms of self-destruction occur within fascism on a gradient, i.e. Eco's cult of death point from fascism, e.g. the death before dishonor mentality of the Nazi SS and mirror syndrome versus the Khmer Rouge's more literal auto-genocide approach, the former toxifying socialist argumentation and aesthetics versus cultural Marxism, and the latter toxifying Marxist-Leninist rhetoric, with Stalinist paranoia and French noble savage argumentation to push for final victory in one, and the other for a year zero erasure of the present world, i.e. out of the same old revenge arguments in either case, pushing towards post-Rubicon desperation whenever the leader might otherwise appear to be mistaken, i.e. the leader is always right, being a fascist principle, both regimes being sick with genocide as something to exact. Military optimism becomes a cult of death, often a mechanical one, if industry is preserved, or an inhumane and primitive one, if not, re insect politics, regardless. Except the latter example literally cannibalized its own population, doing so for ideological and material reasons. They had destroyed their country's food production and declared everyone inside an enemy within, i.e. fascism is a disguise that eats itself. For the state, to the state's detriment, because the state relies on inherent us versus them paradoxes to alienate, fetishize, and pimp nature with. So while the Nazis ate themselves alive on the Eastern Front, the Khmer Rouge literally did it at home and lied about it to hold on to power. It weakens itself to then feed on the already vulnerable, a horrific self-lie as you immolate, then eat your own children, calling them brood. Mirror syndrome reaching delusionally inwards. Artist Francisco Goya. This is why I am an anarchist, kids. R.E. Preface. Marxist-Leninism horseshoes into fascism because the state, Marxist or not, always decays to protect itself by eating itself through lies that hijack its own war, persecution mechanisms. R.E. punching the alien as a disease to purify through military optimism, devolving into persecution mania, and finally death. This isn't a bug, but a feature of the nation-state model, which capital balloons, i.e. from decimation, or 1/10 of a population being killed as practiced by the Romans to their victims, to the Khmer Rouge arguably killing over half of theirs. Cambodia's last census before the Khmer Rouge came to power in April 1975 was held in 1962. It counted the country's population at 5.72 million. Source Ben Kiernan's The Demography of Genocide in Southeast Asia. Estimates for the genocide ranges between 1.5 and 3 million. Source University of Minnesota's Cambodia. The above fatalities for that nation were far smaller than the 40 million committed by Mao and a so-called Great Leap Forward. All genocides being bad are things comparable to genocides, i.e. accidental famines. Indeed, Great Leap Forward is synonymous with Mao just as much as his early marvels, e.g. The Long March, i.e. having lies the crown with dictators who, as the heads of state, bear the burden for their failed policies, with hunger being an ancient weapon of war designed to keep workers in check. Mao denying his own failures, his repeated doing so arguably the opposite of heroic, with pimps being giant cowards who historically abuse women, whom they chatelize for power and profit. To that, Mao wasn't just a murderous state leader who killed millions of people, i.e. on par with Lenin, FDR, and Hitler, as well as someone who betrayed those around him later in life. See the Cultural Revolution. He was a massive hypocrite prone to being exceedingly gross behind his own legendary status, a tactic that Empanada wears on his sleeve, almost eager to be as gross as possible while acting beyond reproach. Fake it till you make it. This includes Mao's toxically masculine treatment of women, pimping out the peasantry as he aged. Many of the women that Mao slept with were daughters of poor peasants who, Li said, believed that sleeping with the chairman was the greatest experience of their life. Mao was happiest and most satisfied when he had several young women simultaneously sharing his bed, and he encouraged his sexual partners to introduce him to others. He often told the young women to read the Taoist sex manual, The Plain Girl's Secret Way, in preparation for their trysts. Source, The Private Life of Chairman Mao, 1994, by Dr. Li Zizhu, cited Mao's Private Life, 2016, but also his bodily functions in general. So while girl shit, for example, might be used to humanize women versus placing them on a pedestal, Mao would seem to rub his own fecal matter in people's faces. The man was chronically constipated. As Ludwig describes, the chairman's bodyguards were trained not only to protect him against enemies, but also to give him enemas if they failed at prying the stubborn poop from his butt with their fingers first. Even Mao's poops were regarded as special occasions. At the end of a 9-day bout of constipation, his employees rejoiced, "The chairman's bowels have moved." Source, A.C. Grimes, The Disgusting Truth, 2023. Never meet your heroes, but especially dictators who tend to be weird and quick to anger. Again, like Ben Empanada unironically imitating such persons, he might make a funny face and pass it all off as humor or whatever he's aiming for below. In truth, it's a thinly veiled disguise for someone who'd swap places with Mao if he could. R.E. Bad Empanada only cares about power and getting it, desiring to be great in ways that are hardly conducive to universal liberation. He's just as hungry as Mao, but lacking in that man's godly power or militant skills, with revolution a front for imperial appetite. He casualty of the usual bald-faced lies Bad Empanada shamelessly tells. He's a Castro clone, minus the gay elements. Indeed, his desire to imitate such people, even in jest, appears to lack any irony at all, ordering others to give him their money without a shred of dignity or forethought, enjoying the double standard of pimping himself out. Beyond Stalin or Mao, all so-called great men of history suck because they're tied to capital doing what capital does, killing people by moving money through nature to try and live forever, the banality of evil the bourgeoisie exhibit as a whole. Whether a dictator of the proletariat or nakedly of the bourgeoisie owning factories, other forms of capital, a dictator is a dictator and loves to make exceptions, boundaries for me, not for thee, while self-aggrandizing and treating giant numbers of people like spilt milk. Profit is profit, Megadeth is Megadeth, workers ignominiously reduced to mere statistics, necrometrics, by cruel arbiters of necessary state violence, i.e. dictators under capital and imperialism or anywhere else, are rapists, and for what the number of apologists who exist kissing their long-dead asses are just as staggering as the casualties their masters inflicted once upon a time, i.e. Bad Empanada and his ilk, who carry out the tradition of all dead generations that weighs like a nightmare in the brains of the living. They don't camp Mao, or Marx for that matter. They suck his ghostly dick, hungry and nostalgic for that sweet, sweet power dictators famously enjoy and lie to others about, passing themselves off as celibate, knowing it's bullshit. Source: James Keating's Mao's Greatest Leap Forward and How It Killed Millions, 2024. Time is a circle, communist obscurantism, merely window dressing, that cannot conceal dictator being warlord by another name, one used historically in bad faith. Like a fatal portrait, then, history repeats first in tragedy, then in farce, dictators a dubious solution to capital that takes power away from workers at great expense, i.e. churches to worship at, MLs routinely putting their faith in such men versus admitting to themselves and others that Lenin and Stalin were wrong, follow the leader being a fascist tactic. And let's be honest, it's not like dictators ever truly get along, or Operation Barbarossa or the Sino-Soviet split. Rather than tragedy or farce, the third option, I argue, is camp, breaking the spell on a horizontal, anarchistic level, as said dictators, and capital as a whole, has over workers like Bad Empanada, killing our darlings. But that is a topic I've explored elsewhere at length, interrogating power through your own camp. Here, merely remember the kinds of terrible people like Bad Empanada unironically worship behind their own "it's just a joke" veneer. To it, they are just as gross, a fact others have testified to as well. My larger body of work. Regarding my larger body of work, there's frankly a lot, and I'm mostly including it to be holistic, so I'll try and summarize things here in a page, i.e. in 4 paragraphs, plus the abstract. My work is holistic and broad, but also extensive and multi-volumed over years. In doing so, I'll likewise provide a variety of links, which, unless stated otherwise, lead to my 18 and up website, where my entire book on Gothic communism is stored and exhibited, though again, you can find a safe work version of the same promo page and series abstract on this blog. First, my name is Persephone Vanderwoord. I'm a multi-book, non-profit author, activist, sex worker, and pornographic historian invigilator who specializes in sex positivity, universal liberation through Gothic poetics. My book series is called Sex Positivity versus Sex Coercion, or Gothic Communism Liberating Sex Work Under Capitalism Through Iconoclastic Art. Gothic communism, as I define it, is the deliberate, pointed critique of capitalism using a unique marriage of Gothic, queer, game theory, and Marxist ideas synthesized by sex-positive workers during proletarian praxis. Meant to end neoliberal fascist capitalism in order to bring about anarcho-communism, this liberation occurs through sex-positive labor and monsters reclaimed by sex workers. Source about the author. Second, my project illustrates mutual consent as a matter of dialectical material context, through informed and shared labor exchange achieved by working with other sex workers and artists, everyone serving a larger mode of expression and development that carries into the future out of the past and present. I spearhead and fund the work, but it's ultimately a group project. Here's the abstract from my 18 and up website's one-page promo, where you can also learn about access the individual volumes, modules, project history, and logo design. My book, Sex Positivity versus Sex Coercion, or Gothic Communism Liberating Sex Work Under Capitalism Through Iconoclastic Art, examines the various differences between sex positivity and sex coercion and sexualized media. Its Gothic gay anarcho-communism combines a wide variety of theories in order to critique capital and capital's sexualization of all workers, anarcho-communism, Marxism, and fourth wave intersectional feminism with the sharpness of Gothic academic theory, the immediacy of online political discourse, as well as post-colonial, post-human, and queer theory, ludology, sex education, anti-fascist, thus anti-war, anti-capitalist sentiment, poetry, and a variety of ironic, xenophilic sex worker illustrations, and negotiating labor exchanges creative successes that illustrate mutual consent in Gothic BDSM language, i.e. what I call Little Gothic BDSM, using various poetic devices to establish, among other things, rape play, and the palliative numinous during calculated risk to raise emotional Gothic intelligence and class culture and race awareness, e.g., Metroidvania and the monstrous feminine, having the whore's revenge against profit, pimping nature, or a rape reprise. As such, sex positivity employs these theories and their respective language, modes of expression, holistically and intersectionally to dialectically materially examine and combat unironic, xenophobic, mental enslavement during the Internet age, sex positivity and universal liberation from profit and the state versus sex coercion and universal enslavement pursuant to profit. RE, the deliberate pointed critique of capitalism, and the state using a unique marriage of Gothic queer game theory and semi-Marxist ANCOM ideas synthesized by sex-positive workers during proletarian praxis, developing systemic catharsis magliminal expression with Little Gothic BDSM. Refer to paratextual documents for the full definition, as well as all of the core Gothic theories I use. Specifically, sex positivity tackles how neoliberal state corporate proponents, i.e. official or stochastic cops including TERFs, trans-exclusionary radical fascist feminists, and other standard to tokenize crypto-fascists use canonical imagery created from coerced sex work to affect imagination as a socio-material process, i.e. using canon to generate complicated lingual-material arrangements that continuously exploit sexualized workers through widespread xenophobia under late-stage capitalism, i.e. capitalism sexualizes all workers to heteronormatively serve the profit motive, commonly through harmful Gothic poetics and BDSM theatrics, canonically exploit said arrangements to enshrine their abuse in abject, cryptonymic, ontological crypts, chronotopes that incarcerate, lobotomize, infantilize, and incriminate the public imagination, i.e. Mark Fisher's capitalist realism, or myopic inability to imagine a world beyond capitalism, even when capitalism is in decay, whose maxim regarding capitalist realism reads, "It is easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism." Source: Capitalist Realism, 2009. Simultaneously pimp and condemn sex-positive artists who seek to liberate sexualized workers through their own iconoclastic, ironically xenophilic praxis, i.e. camping the canon to escape its brutal historical materialism through their own creative successes, achieving paroxysmal catharsis regarding systemic abuse and generational trauma. Sex positivity illustrates, similar to how oscillation is a key component of the Gothic, that Gothic communism is the oscillation between capitalism and anarcho-communism as dialectical material forces felt in Gothic language by real people. Oppositional praxis, or the practical application synthesis of theory and dialectical material opposition. To combat nation-states as the ultimate foe, Gothic communism's chief aim is to be campier, thus sexier and funnier than Marx, camping his ghost to develop a holistically intuitive anarcho-communism that got through a widespread, collective, and solidarized emotional and Gothic intelligence, awareness that recultivates the superstructure and reclaims the base through intersectional resistance and de facto extracurricular education. Re-education. Simply put, Gothic has that mood, that cool factor to do the trick, i.e. by subverting monstrous language, which normally dehumanizes workers and nature, through popular stories furthering abjection, us versus them, to suitably humanize the harvest, which capital and its realism can only pimp out when vengefully raping nature as monstrous feminine whore. The whore's revenge against profit, then, is to fuck back on the same aegis, i.e. when the man comes around, show him your aegis. When done correctly, its paradoxical, cryptonymic exposure will set you free, i.e. silences genocide, but reversing objection must happen together as one, per intersectional solidarity healing from rape through a shared pedagogy of the oppressed, walking away from homeless and towards post-scarcity while becoming better stewards of nature than historically have ever existed. Assimilation is poor stewardship. Medusa demonstrates there is power in what they try to control. Take it back by using it in ways they can't steal from you. Become the Gorgon. The collective, holistic idea is to break capitalist realism vis-a-vis the historical material reality that capital not only alienates everything, but sexualizes, fetishizes it too. The latter idea is actually the subject of my PhD, which concerns various ways to challenge capitalist realism during Little Gothic BDSM. Little Gothic BDSM combines of Gothic theory and poetry with ludology, a study of play, and BDSM power exchange ideas mid-praxis. My 2023 combining of an older academic term, ludic Gothic, Gothic video games, with sex-positive BDSM theatrics as a potent means of socio-political camp. Source: About the Author, 2024. To it, my work builds off Marx, capping his theories and limitations by expanding them beyond his frankly older, more narrow treatment of class reductionism that still exists today. See Safe for Work blog post, Making Marx Gay, a holistic and all-inclusive and GNC methodology that includes race and emotional Gothic intelligence as well as class culture and race awareness to change socio-material conditions, to reclaim the base and recultivate the superstructure, with a proxial emphasis on the latter during workers' daily efforts to cultivate and develop such things. We do so to recultivate a countercultural understanding of the Gothic imaginary past, one we seek to challenge capital with by having our horse revenge against profit, i.e. by challenging profit and capital's Cartesian, secular, colonial, and heteronormative elements pimping nature through liminal, half-real, on-stage and off-poetic extensions of ourselves we pass off onto future generations. Like I said, my corpus is quite broad, re. 6 books in my book series, which concluded in June, re. It Began with a Whisper. However, I also have 2 other books besides, re. that also cover sexuality and fascism in media when developing Gothic communism, Hot Carl, and Persephone's 2025 Metroidvania corpus. On top of those, I also have a body of work after sex positivity and its June 2025 finale, and small-form content, e.g. essays on and interviews with other sex workers, i.e. those muses and models I've worked with beyond those on my acknowledgements page, whose featured models worked with me while I produced sex positivity. To see everyone I've drawn before, during, and after said series, refer to my sex worker page. Assorted evidence submitted by others. Some evidence on Bad Empanada has been shared with me by others of their own accord. Not all of it is dated sourced, so consider it alleged if those sources and or dates aren't included. Here, Bad Empanada complains being GNC with pinkwashing Zionism. Source gate Spartan Joe 193, November 2nd, 2025, originally posted September 15th, 2025. My speech, Morning Charlie Kirk at the University of Queensland, by Drew Pavlo. Bad Empanada Live. Drew Pavlo organized a candlelight vigil for Charlie Kirk in Australia. Incidentally, Bad Empanada is from Australia. Terribly Queer 42069. Describing this as a form of psychosis is absolutely correct. Like, what the fuck is happening? Like, queer and trans folk like myself are losing friends over this type of shit because we're not sad, empathetic for him, and laugh at the memes. Even saying I thought it was wrong didn't stop my cis-het YouTube friend from getting aggressive over this, and he doesn't even know shit about Kirk. Skull emoji. Bad Empanada replies, Yo, please get something interesting about yourself beyond identity categories. It's extremely Israeli to just focus on the sincerely hard on an innate identity to the point it's your username, and every comment you make can be boiled down to, I have this special identity, and they don't. Like, is there not more to your friend than YouTube cishet? The most relevant thing about your friend here is that they're a right-winger, not their race or sexual orientation. Yet you don't even mention their politics, and only mention their identity categories. And is there not more to you than being terribly queer? I'd hate to have to be around Americans, because my God, y'all, just different sides of identity narcissism. Apparently, queer people don't live in Australia. For many of you, the only reason you aren't Zionists is that you weren't born Jewish. You exhibit all the same identity obsessions and thought processes that led Zionist Jews where they are now, politics based solely on self-interest and identity solidarity. Spartan Joe 193. Bad Empanada Live? Bruh, what the fuck? Yeah. Here, Bad Empanada allegedly laughs at a rape victim. The reason my family left Ireland in the late 1940s was because my great-grandmother was raped by a Protestant settler, leading to the birth of my grandmother. In total, I am around 40% Irish, and I am eligible for 26 county citizenship. Don't make assumptions, dipshit. You gonna apologize for this? No, you are super cringe. I'm actually gonna retweet it and laugh at it again. Here, an ignominious Cree speaks out against him. Source essay number 7, transphobe Bad Empanada goes mask off. Rain in Tea, reposting the comment I just made on President Sunday's channel because it also fits here, as well as speaks to the same pattern BE's transphobia fits into, as in they're definitely related. To use a cliche opening, As an Indigenous Cree, yes, I can get more specific, but it's a tiny nation, so it would be a little too specific for comfort. Person in Canada, who, like many others, finds Indigenous a bit stilted and awkward to use in a casual context, and so when a particular nation doesn't apply, prefers Native, or basically anything aside from Indian, unless it's very specific context. What turned me off the last time I stopped watching BE a couple of years ago was, among other things, him dying on the hill that Indian was the correct term for natives, Indigenous people in the US and Canada, and basically calling anyone who disagreed an idiot. There were a few other reasons I stopped watching that I can't remember, but I started watching again on and off last year when he started showing up in my timeline's algorithms again. And guess what? He pulls the same damn thing. In fact, I think this gets lost in the chaos, as Indigenous issues always do, but that was originally where the latest discourse controversy started with BE after the Philosophy Tube video. BE jumped on people criticizing PT for using Indian in a context that most aware people living in Canada and the US would know is inappropriate. Then he chooses to die on that hill. Again, plenty of Americans were trying to correct him, and every time he'd pull the "I'm not listening to Americans, that's like saying you need to listen to Israelis about Zionism." And when you had actual Indigenous people weighing in, he'd go off about identity politics and how trying to use identity politics made any native's point moot. All the while, he kept pointing to one academic paper that did a poll on the preferred term, as he misinterpreted the paper he was pointed to. And then he argued with anyone who A, pointed out how fucked up it is to talk over Indigenous lived experiences by slapping an academic paper down, and B, the fact that he was misinterpreting the results. And that, combined with some other comments, just made it so clear that he holds that attitude about people who live in Canada, USA, that completely disregards the marginalized people who lived here, all while weaponizing that marginalization against the region, and, with the way these people do it, holding people's own marginalization against them, which is exactly what these people, albeit correctly, accuse racist, imperialist, Zionists, Islamophobes of doing. Footnotes. Hogel's counterfeit ties to Western models of power that tyrants around the world ontologically imitate, meaning anachronistically but haunted, as I and others argue, by state power, are specters of Caesar. As I write in replying to John Barbas, many of the most privileged are also the most fragile, i.e. white straight Americans breaking down the moment you challenge their beliefs. Often this happens by showing them their own hypocrisy and beneficiary status, i.e. under imperial models, a conflicted state of mind existence I call mirror syndrome, furthering objection to denying one's cop-like role, RE from Volume 3. Per Radcliffe, rape and police abuse is a potent aphrodisiac, RE Radcliffe's refrain, hence where shadows are both invented and power is found by demasking such fiends, i.e. what canonical Gothic uses to hint at police abuse, only to tokenize us through the same gaslight. Source, Real Life, Toxic Love, and Criminal Sexuality and True Crime, 2025. In turn, and per Radcliffe's refrain, such things are scapegoats to banish, but also ghosts of the counterfeit to quickly summon and banish from behind black veils pulled aside mid-inheritance. In the Gothic, from the later 18th century on, as David Punter has shown, the middle class often does what we have just seen Leroux do in Le Fantôme. It displaces the hidden violence of present social structures, conjures them up again as past, and falls promptly under their spell, with feelings of both fear and attraction towards the phantasms of what is displaced. The Gothic, well before Leroux adopts it, enables a growing bourgeois hegemony to be both haunted by and distanced from the hidden barbarities that have helped make it possible, and hence the repressed uncertainties it feels about its own legitimacy, as in Abraham's Phantom, by projecting such anomalies into the horrors of apparently old and alien specters, buildings, and crypts. Source, the Gothic of the Ghost of the Counterfeit, Leroux's Phantom, and the Cultural Work of the Gothic, 2002. In other words, and per Hogel unto myself, power in the West is largely faked and has been out from the start. Hogel argues that modern Gothic is surrounded in fakery. In turn, Hogel's observation of the history of the Castle of Otranto forms the basis for understanding the concept of counterfeit as a result of the abjection process, R.E. West, 2023. But Gothic, especially from the middle class side, remains haunted by its own betrayals and to rising feelings of terrorism tied to modern Gothic, R.E. Crawford, 2013. Ergo, police violence under capitalist realism, monopolizing monsters for these aims. Profit through abjection, R.E. Me, 2024. A wild bastard or conqueror of some kind appears from somewhere else, a fearful past below, and must be subsequently dealt with, and generally through heroic medieval levels of violence, extreme prejudice. Artist Derek Zabrocki. Per objection, there must always be a whore to scapegoat, including crooked cops whitewashing their castles when destroyed, from Walpole onwards. A bastard to expose and expunge, rectifying a wronged power, it presumably imitated and usurped. Its state apologia, whose Java arguments author dark scapegoats and death warrants to transfer power from one ruler to the next, often through barbaric levels of poetic force, inside the same chronotopes, i.e. from Bakhtin onto myriad castle-themed power fantasies, e.g. Howard's Conan the Barbarian, looting many a fortress, from unrightful heirs such as evil wizards, dragon lords, black knights, archaic mothers, etc., as dark to justify their righteous slaughter. Below, artist Frank Frazetta. The same fakery and trickery can be used by state powers or by workers, on stage and off, meaning in dialectical material exchanges that hug the alien as a dualistic force, an ink blot. Footnote 2. Excerpts from Patel and Moore's seminal A History of the World in Seven Chief Things regarding reproductive labor, sex work or otherwise, i.e. women's work. A book, I might add, that was given to me by Kuwu, RE from the Poetry Module. Exhibit 34A1B2B for Modularity in Class 2024. Laughed Kuwu reading my copy of Mike Dixon Kennedy's Celtic Myth and Legend. There pussy fucked for hours until it became too sore and we had to try anal. Note, before going home, I swapped Celtic Myth for Kuwu's copy of A History of the World in Seven Cheap Things. Said swap was instrumental in writing sex positivity as it currently exists, i.e. Moore and Patel's arguments were utterly vital in how I think of Cartesian thought relative to the monstrous feminine as harvested by capitalistic forces. Right, Kuwu inspecting my copy of Robert Ingpen, a Michael Page's Encyclopedia of Things That Never Were, one of my favorite books, along with old vintage porno mags Jadis's father inherited from a friend as a joke, and which Jadis wanted nothing to do with after he died. So I give them to Kuwu. The exploitation of such labor, theft is theft, rape is rape, was not restricted to the United States, but also occurred in the USSR. The technologies of employer power in the workplace are so pervasive that they even made an appearance in a place we might least expect, the Soviet Union, where workers themselves, at least on paper, controlled the conditions of their labor. Though much is still made of how distinct the Soviets were from the capitalist West, the continuities outweigh the contrasts. The Soviet model was trapped by the same relations of work and nature. The logic of 20th century state communism was stuck in a 16th century ecology. In fact, the Soviets were rather keen on taking all manner of ideas from their capitalist foes, including those of the American time and motion expert Frederick Winslow Taylor, which were embraced and contested in Soviet industry. Lenin, who had earlier denounced man's enslavement by the machine under Taylorism, insisted in April 1918 that we must definitely speak of the introduction of the Taylor system. Without this, it will be impossible to raise productivity, and without that, we will not usher in socialism. And China. Chinese communists went further in transforming relations of work through collectivism, but it was still infused with a strong Promethean streak. As part of his efforts to free China from famine, Mao declared war on the animals that ate Chinese grain in 1958. A 2-day slaughter would, he thought, ensure the perpetual flourishing of China's population. Humans were to kill on sight the 4 major scourges of fleas, flies, rats, and sparrows. Although the fleas were uncounted, the government catalogued 48,695.49 kilos of flies, 930,486 rats, and 1,367,440 individual sparrows. Without sparrows to feed on it, the invertebrate population grew rapidly. Insects ate grain unchecked, contributing to the 1959-61 Great Chinese Famine, leading to various changes in strategy. For anxious capitalists, massive Chinese mortality was less of a concern than the threat that peasants might seize title to the land. In general, the threat of workers' power and under various radical banners caused capitalists to change their strategies. Capitalism, however, could not survive a day without a third moment of work, the appropriation of human reproductive labor, conducted largely outside the cash nexus, emphasis me. The global factory and the global farm each relies on a family, on a community of care. Thus, a revolutionary politics of sustainability must recognize and mobilize through the contradictions of a tripartite division of work under capitalism: labor power, unpaid care work, and the work of nature as a whole. Worker exploitation is bound together with the appropriation of extra-human nature and the unpaid work of care. Emphasis, me. That ultimately faced hard realities regarding nature as something to exploit by all parties involved, much how states, city, or nation have since antiquity into the present. Figure 1. William Blake, Europe, supported by Africa and America, 1796. Reproductive labor is the work for caring for, nurturing, and raising human communities. Such work is overwhelmingly unpaid because it makes the whole system of wage work possible. Without unpaid work, especially care work, wage work would simply be too expensive. Emphasis, me. But even when we talk of reproductive labor under capitalism, we're referring to a very specific set of arrangements, ones that were rearranged through world ecology and persist today. Under these arrangements, some humans were confined to new political, social, and ecological units, households, the better to engage in care work in capitalism's ecology. Call this the Great Domestication. Just as Spanish colonists had bridled at Mayan sexual adventures, so the British demanded allegiance to their own version of sexual order and power, one that created the legal category of woman and set her in the household, the workshop of reproductive labor. But of course, to use the term workshop is to mischaracterize how housework was viewed. It was considered precisely beyond the domain of wage work, a favor that women did for men, akin to the free gifts that nature offered enterprise. Ergo, sex work, I argue, i.e. the whore and her exploitation during the pimp's revenge, that requires said workers to rebel, re in ways that reverse abjection, ergo profit, and labor exploitation of nature as monstrous feminine more broadly, the whore's revenge, the home versus the home wrecker upon which said home, ergo the state, is built. Any involvement, be it openly capitalist or socialist communist in name, and arguably capitalist in function to whatever degree that is, historically exploits women's work, me vis-a-vis John Duncan, i.e. by taking women's work for granted, therefore advantage of, all over the place. And the discussion of cheap work in the previous chapter, we connected rural and urban economics in the link between global farms and global factories. The availability of proletarian labor was possible only because of the transformation of care work into unpaid work, available as one of nature's free gifts, which, as we have seen, are neither free nor gifted. One radical response to the fundamental devaluation of care work involves a jujitsu pricing move and the demand that housework be paid. As the 1970s Wages for Housework campaign argued, slavery to an assembly line is not a liberation from slavery to a kitchen sink. To deny this is also to deny the slavery of the assembly line itself, proving again that if you don't know how women are exploited, you can never really know how men are. The irony here, of course, is that there's a long history of women who were paid little, if at all, for their domestic labor, those working under slavery. The United States is not alone in this pattern, with carers from different classes, castes, and indeed nations suffering widespread exploitation in other countries too. And even if payment were a route to recognition, there's much further to go to reach dignity. As Angela Davis put it, psychological liberation can hardly be achieved simply by paying the housewife a wage, yet the insight of wages for housework shouldn't be forgotten. To ask for capitalism to pay for care is to call for an end to capitalism. Emphasis, me. This tendency is so pervasive that John Duncan, in his own video, doesn't even mention sex workers at all, leading me to have to call him out for it. When the man comes around, show him your aegis. To free the land is to also free labor and sex, therefore all of nature is monstrous feminine, female or not, white or not. A breaking of all the monopolies used to pimp nature as usual, e.g. of violence, terror, and monsters rooted in the ancient cradle of abuse, showing capital where it eventually will die during the whore's revenge. Or as Carl Sagan put it, to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe. To that, the inventors of society and nature are in for a rude awakening, Descartes, Bacon, and others. See Patel and Moore's section on the Cartesian Revolution, but also state shift, i.e. when Mother Nature, climate change, takes the planet back for good, the capitalist scene laid ungraciously to rest when Medusa sits on it. To prevent that, we must learn to see women, or those treated like women, as capable not just of intelligence, but of revolutionary action, i.e. building a better world through Gothic communism, the domain of Amazons and Gorgons, re. through a holistic and shared intersectional consciousness of class, culture, and race. Re. Kuwu was a revolutionary actor, a trans man to be specific, who thought and read, but also used their sexual labor to further radicalize me. Development is a lifelong battle, continuing long after the present generation has kicked the bucket. Footnote number 3, to which I describe the goal of doing so. Interviewing sex workers specifically. To reverse abjects and thus profit and the state, while pushing towards universal liberation and post-scarcity under Gothic communism. This happens through reclaimed pre-capitalist language, i.e. the wisdom of the ancients, a cultural understanding of the imaginary past, made through workers recultivating the superstructure, social factors, e.g. art, philosophy, and politics, thus reclaiming the base, material conditions, the means of production, by camping the canon. By comparison, abjection leads to unironic war and rape as a business, which go hand in hand with profit since antiquity and to neoliberal capitalism. Relayed through the ancient languages of the state, sex and force, and barring hunter-gatherer societies before money and settlements existed, prostitution is the oldest form of labor, therefore labor exploitation, and struggle against said exploitation sphere and dogma, i.e. when whores appeared, so did pimps trying to control them. Commonly depicted nowadays in black, white, us versus them, cop, criminal, abject language told in popular stories, e.g. on Ripley versus the Alien Queen, or TERFs punching down against a trans scapegoat during Pax Americana, more privileged witches policing less privileged witches, we whores punch up against our oppressors, kettling us on the same aegis. As such, I want to interview those functioning legitimately as the Medusa, not as an easy victim to attack and to organize triangulate against different groups during divide and conquer, but as a complicated liberator who fights back mid-persecution in the present space and time, i.e. anyone pegged as other by cops through modular canards like criminal, black, witch, alien, chaotic, and or rabble, etc., which standard to token proponents of the state, eager to assimilate, attack with extreme prejudice. Liberation and exploitation share the same space, thus virgin whore aesthetic, through the Gothic mode. The way out of the labyrinth is inside it, subverting the monomyth violence that regularly occurs between fiction and non-fiction alike. Source: Hailing Hellions, Q&A Compendium Interview Series, Sex Workers, 2025. And here we have about the author, the same about the author section as we have on my blog. Same exact information. Also, with a photo of me. This was me back in 2017 when I was still in the closet. My egg had definitely cracked at this point, as I had met someone who was teaching me a lot about queerness. But all the same, I still had a long ways to go before I would be able to write not just my master's, but also my PhD and subsequent book series, as well as work together with all of the people that took part in said series. For example, at this point in time, I was actually a SWERF. I grappled with the idea of sex work. I thought it was life on easy mode, and it took me some time and helping from my ex at the time to teach me that sex work was a valid form of work. And from there, I started doing it myself. I came out of the closet, and I made it a form of praxis through the scholarship that I wrote in opposition to weird TERFs and SWERFs like Bad Empanada. So as far as all of that goes, if you want to support me, you can do so through Ko-fi and Patreon. You can also like, share, and subscribe. And you can leave a comment on this video. This was a long video, and that's because there's a lot going on. And this is the kind of horseshit that people like me have to go through when defending ourselves, because no amount of evidence is good enough. And even if I write an email showing other people proof, specifically straight people, first and foremost, white, straight, male people, first and foremost, and various other YouTubers with larger channels that work with token proponents, they don't respond. And they act like Bad Empanada doesn't exist and that what he's saying isn't doing harm. And that's just not true. So I put this together and invigilated it in such a way that I could read it on YouTube. There are links to the slightly less censored and fully uncensored versions of this same exact information, and you can find those links in this document itself.